Welcome to the meeting of the Arlington School Committee regular meeting on Thursday, May 23rd, 2019. Just getting a little bit of a late start with lots of parking issues outside. So we start our meeting with public participation. Under open meeting law, the committee is generally not able to engage in any discussion or make any decisions based on public comment at this meeting. However, the committee may take comments under advisement for discussion and action at a future meeting, for referral to the administration or a subcommittee, or for discussion during a relevant agenda item. Speakers shall identify themselves and will be allowed 3 minutes. Please come up to the table and speak into the microphone for the home audience. So Deborah Savage.
Hi, my name's Deborah Savage. I am a parent of 3 children, and I'm also the head of a parent group called the Arlington Special Education Alliance. And I'm here to comment on something you haven't had a chance to propose yet, but which I saw online, which is the draft goals for the district for 2019-20. We were at the budget meeting with about 20 parents in tow, I think. So just as a quick FYI, we're a new networking and advocacy group. We've spoken to parents of about 170 special ed kids over the last year to get their input and stories on their experiences with special education services and programs in the district. We have statistical data from about 135 of those parents. We formed because we see some big, long-standing problems with bad practices in the district. We've all run into individuals who are incredibly dedicated to our children and work very hard to help our children, and we're very grateful for that. But we see some big system-wide, long-standing problems that need to be resolved. Our experiences are completely backed up by the observations made by the authors of the lab report in November 2017. We are writing a report on this. I'm sorry I haven't been able to get it to you yet, but we're doing it as a volunteer effort. It's not our day job. I think it'll be ready by next week, though. I'm responsible for pulling the final pieces together. So far, it's about 40-plus pages, and the appendices, which have data analysis, are about the same amount. So it's going to be a big report. And we're integrating information from the most recent regulatory audit, the lab report, all of the parent data that we have gathered, and the APS draft 5-year budget plan to identify some really big ticket issues that need addressing and to try and figure out whether or not the district has plans to address them or not. So we took a look at the draft APS goals for 2019-20, and we see that there are 4 proposed goals, each of which has 2 to 3 goal objectives. Little bits and pieces scattered in there are relevant to special education, like literacy coaches, things like that. But special education as a discrete topic only appears as one piece of one objective of one goal. And based on our analysis, which again I will try to hand you next week, that is completely insufficient. It's not remotely sufficient to address some of the long-standing issues, and they're serious issues. They're not just administrative snafus. It's issues of program availability, program suitability, and the actual ultimate outcomes for our children, their well-being, and their academic performance and progress. So we would like to propose a couple of new goals for the district to consider. We would like to come, I believe there's going to be a subcommittee meeting to discuss this further, headed up by Jane Morgan at some point. I don't know if that's been scheduled yet. We'd like to come to that meeting to discuss further, and hopefully we will all have the report in hand at that point. But at a minimum, we think the district needs to do a best practices review of special education practices. The lab report, it's identified already several areas where the district is not using best practices: co-teaching, direct instruction on skills and academic support classes, and a lack of specially designed instruction in the district, which is required by special education law but is not happening. Parent input confirms all of that. Our report has specific examples from parents and adds a lot of information and examples on problems with implementation of accommodations and transitions between schools. The lab report and parent input also identify some system-wide issues around staffing, the collection and use of data for a variety of purposes within special education, and the fuzzy line between general education initiatives and special education initiatives as applied to special ed kids. The report addresses all of those in, I think, fairly coherent chapters. So we think a best practice review is absolutely needed. It is recommended in the lab report that such a review be done for every single SPED practice and program in the district, and we heartily agree. If you already have such a review or pieces of such a review that we don't know about, we would love to get that information so that we can take that into account in our analysis. We also propose a goal related to data on student performance. We believe that the district has pretty low performance expectations for special education children. There's, again, some evidence on this in our report.
Point of order. We're extending far beyond the 3 minutes
Okay.
typical.
I'll finish up in 30 seconds. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yes, but we only have one speaker tonight. And
We have to, every single decision and program in the district on special education or anything else needs to be made with specific goals in mind. And one of the top goals you should be figuring out is what are the outcomes we want for our students. We don't believe that the district actually has a system for figuring out what those outcomes should be for special ed students and actually measuring that, and there's a lot of evidence on this. Basically, we think you need a strategic plan on special ed, but we think those two issues, best practices and looking at student performance goals, probably need to come first. And the last thing I'll say is that we are organized, we are informed, we are not going away. We need you to work with us to try to repair some of the damaged relationships and mistrust that a lot of parents have. We think a collaboration can be very fruitful. But if we don't see a collaboration happening and some action sooner rather than later, we will look at other ways of trying to make change. So thank you for your time, for letting me take that extra bit of time.
Thank you.
I just want to share with you, all subcommittee meetings are open, and they're on our calendar, so you find one.
didn't see that one yet, but I'll
Okay.
look for it.
Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda is the curriculum presentation on literacy. Dr. McNeil, you want to introduce these speakers?
Yes, I would like to bring to the table Deb Perry, our Director of Literacy in English, K through 12. Come on up. As I call your name, please come to the table. And the literacy coaches, elementary literacy coaches, we have Shannon O'Brien, Maria Amato, and Dr. Ali Megahays.
Can we put everybody up here?
Sure. Just pass the mic as you speak.
Okay, thank you. And so,
And if you could introduce other individuals who you've brought along with you.
so this is Heather Mahoney, a sixth grade teacher. You have to speak into the mic, sorry. This is Heather Mahoney, a sixth grade teacher from Gibbs.
Hi, I'm Nicole Edson, high school teacher here.
Elizabeth Harple, another high school teacher.
Play musical chairs back and forth.
Okay.
And so this is a very opportune time because we are reviewing a draft of the district goals, but the literacy team here is to kind of give a background and some context to those goals and also kind of give you a state of affairs of where we are with literacy within the district. So I'm going to hand it over to Director Deb Perry.
Not everybody calls me director. Shh. Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having us. I thought that it would be a great idea for you to get a slight perspective on what goes on in ELA and literacy by hearing from some the coaches from the elementary and then from Heather talking a little bit about something that's going on at Gibbs, and then from 2 high school teachers about some initiative that we're taking around the junior year. So we'll start with the coaches. I just want to thank you for last year voting the budget that allowed us to have yet another coach. So we now have 4. Linda's not here. She came to the last meeting a couple weeks ago when I was here. Having 4 coaches has changed the kind of work that we can do at the elementary, and these guys will talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Allie Megahayes. I focus mostly on 1st and 2nd grade. And with the increased number of coaches this year, I've been really able to spend some time with first-year teachers. And I've been in 2 first-year, 1st grade classrooms for the entire year, at least once or twice a week. And the benefit of that is that I'm able to model a lesson, and then we debrief together, and we actually go off and help the kids with conferring, either reading or writing workshops. So we'll confer together, we'll pull small groups together. I'm able to meet with the teachers, and we'll plan a lesson together. We'll think about what we should be putting in place before the unit starts. After the lesson, we get a chance to debrief, we get to reflect on the lesson and on the unit, and we get to see what should we do for the next time. The new teachers are part of a mentor program, so they, about 7 times a year, get to go off with a mentor teacher. But I feel like the coaching relationship that I've established this year with the new teachers is a big benefit because I get to go in their classroom, and we get to work with specifically their students. And that kind of relationship, I think, is a huge benefit. One other thing that I've tried to start this year are in-house lab sites. So these are building-based and grade-level based. So within one building, one grade level gets to be released from their classroom for about an hour. And within that hour, we're all together in one classroom. Typically, I'll model a small group lesson while the teachers observe, and then we debrief that lesson. And one of the best parts, I feel, is after that, after I model, the teachers go off and they try that exact lesson on students. So they're getting that immediate feedback, they're getting that immediate practice time, and it's the kind of PD that I've gotten some great feedback on because teachers are able to, in the moment, see a lesson and then apply it right away, and then I'm there to coach them through the lesson. And the lesson usually relates right to that unit that they're in at that moment, so they can try it out on their classroom the next day, the next week, or whenever they're inside that unit. So the principals have been really supportive with this because they had to find coverage for the teachers during that 1 hour, which I know was a real struggle sometimes. But they've been really supportive with me having to plan that with grade levels in their building. So I hope to do more of that next year as well.
Hi. So I work primarily with 3rd and 4th grade. I share 4th grade with Shannon.
Excuse me, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's Maria Amato.
And you teach?
I'm a literacy coach as well.
Literacy coach as well,
So
okay.
all 3 of us are literacy
good.
coaches. So I work primarily with 3rd and 4th, as I said. And this year I had the opportunity to help teachers implement a couple of new readers workshop units in 3rd grade, which are brand new to the system. And again, having another coach with them, having the availability of another coach here has been so valuable because when they're implementing these new units, they really need the support of being able to plan with someone, having someone come into their rooms to model lessons, to help with conferencing and how to just do the general routine of the workshop, because in 3rd grade, we are new to the Reader's Workshop model, and just to have someone there to be able to structure it and help them through it has been really valuable. And we were able to give them half-day professional development as well at the beginning of both of those units. I also worked with 3 schools who piloted a brand new unit, a nonfiction unit. They were really excited on their own to try out this new unit. So we were able to give them a lot of PD with that. I went in, I sat with teams, planned the whole unit ahead of time, and then went into their classrooms and supported them as well, kind of like how Allie was explaining. And they were so enthusiastic about it, they presented at a whole district PD, and now 80% of the teachers are going to be doing that new unit next year, even though it's actually not required till the following year. So that was a really good sign. And lastly, I've been able to work with teachers looking at data. We've been able to collect data through pre and post assessments, and then we are able to analyze it together, and then really look at that data and decide, okay, how can that inform our instruction? What can we do to work to challenge certain students, and what can we also do to help the struggling students? I'm going to let Shannon talk a little bit more about fourth grade, but I also worked with some new fourth grade teachers. We had 8 new fourth grade students in the fourth grade teachers in the district. So that's a lot of new teachers to work with. So we have had the opportunity to go into a lot of those classrooms as well and do the same sort of work. Yeah, we can just change this.
I'm Shannon O'Brien. I work primarily with 4th and 5th grade, and like Allie and Marie have said, we've really been able to go full force in our new teachers' classrooms and really support them. Giving them feedback that is not evaluative has been very helpful too for us to set goals with teachers and to really look like, this is something I'm working on. I really want to work on formative instruction. I really want to look at formative assessment and how it impacts students. We can set that goal, and within a coaching cycle, we can work with them and come up and say, okay, well, we met this goal. 80% of our goal was met. How are we going to get to that 100%? I also was able to support 5th grade in a new way. There weren't a lot of new 5th grade teachers, but what we did do was we piloted several new units, getting ready to ramp up for them to be expected units next year. And so I was able to work with those teachers, and we were able to really look at student data and create data tracking sheets for these students and really look at what was working, what wasn't working, where were the areas of weakness. We really kind of correlated with our Common Core standards and saw where there needed to be lessons embedded and how to get the rigor to bump up. The change from 4th to 5th grade with the Common Core standards is quite a big one. And so we were able to work with teachers, and the benefit of us working with multiple grades is saying, this is where your 4th graders left off in these units of study, and here's where the 5th graders take off, and we're preparing those 5th graders to transition into 6th grade to be successful. So that's where we spend a lot of our time.
Heather Mahoney has been a 6th grade teacher. She taught at Ottoson, and she made the move to Gibbs this year. And a year ago, the 6th grade teachers wrote a grant to the AAF on book clubs, and she's going to talk a little bit about how those work.
Thank you. So our literature circles, our book clubs, came directly from a conversation that the 6th grade ELA teachers were having, where we talked about that 6th graders come to us such good readers, that they love their books, they carry their books around with them all the time. But as they're entering middle school, their love of reading has a lot of competition with a lot of more action-packed things. So we were thinking about this and thinking about, okay, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, what do we want these 6th graders and their relationship with reading to be? And we were talking about how we wanted 6th graders eventually to, as adults, have ownership over their reading. We wanted them to be adults who pick up a book and get excited about it and want to talk to people about it. So the natural next step for us was to take book clubs, which are done in reading workshops, which are done in the elementary schools, and use them to bridge that gap up in 6th grade. So the AAF gave us a very generous grant, and our project is titled Discovering Our Voices with Literature Circles. And in this, it ends up being the culminating unit for 6th grade, where we've been working on very explicitly teaching not only literacy skills, but also executive functioning skills, and it turns out this fits in very nicely with the 6th grade responsive classroom and the ideas of accountability, collaboration, cooperation, all of that. Last year we piloted this unit for the first time with books that we had chosen based on what we thought would be high interest for 6th graders. We took recommendations from the students themselves. We sought recommendations from blogs like We Need Diverse Books, who really champion authors of color, and we are using that to really bring in voices into our classrooms that historically haven't been heard enough. So we had a really good experience with it last year. We focused mostly on figuring out, none of us had done book clubs before, so we used this mostly to figure out for ourselves, how is this going to work? We set up the infrastructure for how this would work with the routines that 6th graders so desperately need in the course of a day. And we're really happy with how it started. And what we're looking forward to is incorporating more explicit instruction and activities in digital and media literacy. Eventually, in a few years, phasing in more books that are newer and that students are recommending to us then. And we're really happy with how it's going so far.
And finally, we have two teachers of juniors, Nicole and Elizabeth, and they're here to talk a little bit about something that we've been thinking about for the last couple of years. I need to give you a little background. For a long time, we had two sections of AP language, which is the junior year AP class. And then it grew to 3, and it stayed at 3 for a while. And then over the last 4 or 5 years, it moved to 6 sections, and it's been consistently at 6 now for probably 4 or 5 years, which is pretty amazing. When I think it's not quite half, but almost half of the juniors take AP. And Nicole's going to talk in a minute about what is involved in the language, the AP language course. But one of the things that we've been watching is that there are a couple units that we teach in the AP class that are absolutely discrete and usable and interesting and are totally appropriate for all juniors to be taking. So we're working on, and Elizabeth actually has been working a little bit on taking some of these units and employing them with the level A and the honors junior classes. So with that background, I give it over to Nicole.
So I teach the AP language curriculum, juniors, and so essentially this course is a bit different from what they see in high school. A lot of times they do literary analysis of different texts, and now this course asks them to do a rhetorical analysis. And so one of the essential question of the course is, how does the study of rhetoric enable one to be a contributing citizen and a conscientious consumer? And so I put that question up on the board for them in the beginning of the school year, and one of the first things that we talk about is, what is rhetoric? So I asked them to take out their cell phones and to look up the word rhetoric, not the definition of rhetoric, but how we see the word rhetoric used in media recently. So they'll usually go to Google and they put in rhetoric, and then they pull up different articles, and then I tell them to shout it out to me, and so I put it up on the board and some phrases, and generally what's up on the board almost every single year is phrases like empty rhetoric, racist rhetoric, inflamed rhetoric. And so we noticed that pattern there, that this is clearly being used in a negative way. And so they confirm that, yes, that's normally how I hear that word used. And so we talk about the fact that rhetoric doesn't have to be that way. You know, it can be manipulative, but it also can be civil and effective, especially if you know how to use it. And so we talk about the fact that a lot of the texts, or all the texts we read, we will be doing this analysis, this rhetorical analysis. We talk about to understand the language choices that an author or speaker makes in order to make their purpose known or to make their text effective. And so ultimately, it's the goal, yes, to go back to the essential question. We want them to be conscientious consumers, but we also want them to be able to take ownership over their own writing, over their own speaking, and over their own words, actually. And so we take all different texts, everything from American literature to essays and speeches, a lot of nonfiction. This year, the students did a documentary film unit where they chose a documentary film. You know, with all the streaming services like Netflix and Hulu, they have documentaries are huge right now, and so they have a lot of access to all these documentaries. But I don't know. You know, one thing that they noticed through this unit was, what does this person want me to believe when I'm watching their show, or when I'm watching their, and how are they making me believe this? And so they chose their own documentary, and then they did a rhetorical analysis of at least one scene, and they presented out that scene and why they thought it was either civil and effective or why they thought it was manipulative. And so, you know, on the AP language, on the exam, they actually ask, this is the same question that's on the SAT now. The SAT essay question is asking them to do a rhetorical analysis, and that is a crossover with the AP exam. So all juniors have to know how to do a rhetorical analysis, which is Elizabeth's going to talk about that in a second, but essentially, like a sample of one. This one was 2012, and it was a JFK speech to the steel industries, and so they have to analyze his choices. And then another prompt on the exam will ask them to take a position. So they will usually put something. The topic will usually be something really relevant to what's happening in society. So they have to know what's happening in their world. And ultimately, I think the goal for this course is, like I talked about, we want them to see that their language has power and that they don't want power to be had over them, and that they should really assert themselves and their voices. And I think that's one of the things we talk about is the power of their voice. I promise I didn't plan this part. I just wrote a thank you letter from a student, and she's graduating this year. I had her in class last year, and she said, one of the things she said in her letter was she read a Margaret Atwood poem just the other day, and it's, Spelling is the name of the poem, and she said she read the line, a word after a word after a word is power, and she said that really was what reminded her of the essence of this course. And so I don't know if that always happens, but that was really nice. I was like, wow, that's perfect, good timing. So I think this is a course that's really near and dear to my heart, because I think it gives students a way to, it gives them a voice, and it gives them a way to make some really powerful choices in their own language and their own arguments. Okay.
Okay. So with all that in mind, I don't teach AP language, but I do teach American literature honors level and A level, so I have a good chunk of juniors of my own. So thinking about all the good stuff that you heard Nicole talk about as far as rhetorical analysis goes, we were thinking about how do we incorporate some of these units into the class so that everyone can have access to these tools and these strategies. So I began by sort of teaching a little mini unit on rhetorical analysis, tried to make it a little bit more consumable for all the levels, which required some differentiating on my part. And it's really about asking the kids to do something different. They're so used to literary analysis. What's the theme? Who are the characters? What's their motivation? And instead, they're thinking again about the speaker's choices, the author's choices, the language choices. What's the purpose of this? And how does that interact with me and how I'm reading it and my positionality? So thinking about all those things together, and then we moved on to, I decided to experiment this year with a particular unit on justice in America. It seemed very timely, and I was planning on teaching Scarlet Letter at the end of the year, which is being very ambitious of me. And I wanted to have a kind of a segue for them to make that text more relevant. So I decided to begin by choosing what I thought were the most essential texts out of that AP unit for all the levels. For example, they read Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail, which has actually been a really nice crossover with their history classes. They've been studying a lot, apparently at the same time they were studying civil rights, so it actually sort of meshed together perfectly. As well as some more contemporary pieces and even a little dash of poetry here and there, some Langston Hughes poetry, for example. And so I took these texts and we practiced our rhetorical strategies, but as we were doing that, I also was trying to empower in them the ability to use evidence to make claims and make arguments. Because like Nicole mentioned, I also want them to come out of this being strong citizens, but also better people and how they argue, both in writing and in discussion. So we did a lot of discussion throughout the unit. And we sort of culminated with a response paper, which I just finished grading today. I'm proud of myself. And the prompt, one of the prompt options was this kind of claim. So the task was for them to sort of argue for or against these types of claims. So this is an example. The concept of justice conveys meaning if it is distributed without prejudice. The fact that income, race, gender, etc., dictates the availability of justice in America renders the very concept meaningless. So we've been working for several weeks around these sort of topics. They've read a lot of sources, and I asked them in the end to tie all these sources together, their own thinking, the thinking of their classmates, and sort of create a response paper. And what was kind of beautiful about that was I had many students come to me afterwards excited for me to read their papers. I had several who were proud of their writing, and you don't often get A-level juniors in May proud about their writing, excited, waiting for you to grade it because they want to see if they got that A for the first time. And I will say that I had a lot of really well-done papers. I was very proud of them. So I think the kids responded very well to this. They love these rhetorical strategies. They like this new way of thinking. Many students were excited because it gave them a new lens, a new way of looking at the world. And so I think it's been very successful, and I look forward to experimenting more with it next year. Thank you.
So I think you'll probably have a few questions. I just want to summarize a little of what we heard by saying that you hopefully heard a few themes. One of the themes being the power of language, another being trying to help students find their own voices and to identify other voices, and the issue of perspective, being in different places, looking at what you're reading and what you're hearing, and trying to see the world from a number of different places. All those things are sort of tied together with a lot of the work that we're doing. So I'm wondering if you have questions for us.
Question, Mr. Hayner?
Not necessarily a question. I want to thank you all for you three instilling the love of reading, and you three for making them effective tools and great citizens. And that emotion that you shared, it's the gift of being a good teacher.
Dr. Seuss?
So quick comment, I love the idea of kids developing this wonderful, powerful voice, but they just do it less at home. More in the world.
We cannot come home with you.
I know. I know. I just have a question about sort of who's being served by all these. So as I understand it, at the high school level, you've integrated things from the AP course about rhetoric into all the courses. And that means every level, is that right? Okay. Yes. And then for the reading groups, is that hitting every kid? Is it a small group of kids?
So in the reading groups, every single student in our classes participates. So in the books that we selected and that we make available to the students, we purposely chose several books at several different lexiles, so at several different language difficulties. And our goal is to not only give students a certain amount of choice in not only who they work with, but what text they read, but also to make sure that they have available to them texts that are complex, so that they actually learn from them and are challenged by them. And complex means something different for every single kid. So that's the other thing that's really great about these reading groups is that we can get closer to personalizing instruction for each child.
Anybody else? All right, so I will just have a pitch, I think, to the coaches. So often we get concerns from parents, my class size is 24, my class size is creeping up, but we also added a lot of coaches, and it would be great if you could do a little bit more marketing, because we do intend to add a coach, hopefully, to every school. But in order to help us do that, it would help to make sure that the community is aware of all the wonderful work that you're doing and sees the value of having, non-assigned classroom teachers added to the system. So,
I will say we've been in.
go ahead.
I will say that at one particular elementary, and we have been invited to the PTO coffee hour and have been able to talk about the work that we've been doing at that school. And in that school, there is a coach in probably every single classroom at some point or another. So we have started to do that work, and hopefully maybe more principals will catch on and invite us, and we can, pitch the work that we're doing, because the more that parents understand kind of our role and how it's helpful to the teachers, I think I agree with you, the better.
Right. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who came out tonight. I appreciate it by giving a little snapshot into what we do K through 12, what we do in each one of the classrooms K through 12. So thank you very much, and our future is very bright, as you can see.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Now you got to put the chairs back.
No, you can leave them there.
You can leave a couple of them.
Yes, and after a set change, we will move on to our next curriculum presentation, the social studies update. And Dr. McNeil, do you want to introduce again? Or?
So I'm going to call to the table Denny Conklin, our Director of Social Studies, and I know he brought a couple of teachers with him, so he can introduce those teachers. Oh, actually, he has a few.
Cheers.
Oh, boy. Alrighty, so thank you for having us all tonight. If I knew that ELA was going to bring so many people, I would have brought some more. But I we're going to talk a lot about what's going on in social studies K through 12, but the highlight tonight is about the new course in 8th grade next year on civics. So I brought our wonderful 8th grade team here. We have Lucy Conroy, Todd Sundstrom, Eric Backey, and Nikki Hochter, who are 8th grade teachers. So they're going to do the majority of the talking as we think about what this new course embodies, talk about the rationale for it, and we're excited to share that information with you. So it's always nice going after our ELA colleagues because we see so much of what they do echoing in our class, vice versa. So I think it's a really nice pairing. One of the things I want to talk to you about first before we get to the 8th grade information is a little bit of an update on the new frameworks. Last year when I was here, we were talking about the possibility of these getting passed, and then in June, the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education voted on the new history and social science frameworks. So the first update to them since 2003, which is very exciting for those of us who really, really love history and social studies in the classroom. But I want to give you some highlights from those new frameworks. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to highlight some of the guiding principles that are laid out in these new frameworks. Specifically, I want to look at number 2, which highlights the fact that in history and social science education, there's a big value placed on diverse identities and diverse perspectives. So within these frameworks now, they've mentioned race, ethnicity, culture, religion, education, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, and personal experience. And that's something that we're trying to do K through 12, is look at the text that we're using, the people that we're studying, the events that we're looking at, and making sure that they're representative of all of our students' identities and that students have an opportunity to see themselves and their identities in the social studies curriculum at some point. I'll highlight too the idea number 7 about reading comprehension. So I think this points well to what the literacy team was talking about with students' reading comprehension. We know that students have better reading comprehension when they have better background knowledge. And history and social studies provide a really great framework for building that content knowledge and building that background knowledge. The last thing I'll highlight is social emotional skills and how social studies is a wonderful subject for those SEL skills to come out in. A lot of what we talk about in class is about building historical empathy, having students understand the choices that people made, the factors that allow people to make those choices in history, and to borrow a phrase from my previous employer, Phase in History, we talk about the idea that people make choices and choices make history. So something that we try to highlight. So these are laid out at the beginning of the new frameworks as the main principles for history and social studies. Also new in the frameworks are practice standards. So these are things that we've seen in the updated science frameworks that now are happening in the history frameworks. So all of these practice standards revolve around historical thinking skills and the types of questions and inquiries that we want students to be able to develop, the types of sources that we want students to begin to understand. We've been talking a lot as a department about source reliability and source relevance. So these practice standards focus a lot on the reading and the writing and the historical thinking. I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now about what is going to happen from the state in terms of a state assessment in social studies. But basically what people have said, or what I've heard, is as long as you focus on these practice standards and you're reinforcing them in all the history and social studies classes, then your students will be ready for whatever assessment comes out in history and social studies. And then finally, I'll mention that there's also a parallel set of literacy standards that are linked to each of the grade levels in the new history and social studies frameworks. So it's nice to see those elements from the Common Core become aligned with the different history and social studies frameworks. Next up gives you a little bit of an idea on what we've done and where we're going in terms of some district initiatives. So at the elementary level, these are the things that we're going to be undertaking, and this also gives you an idea of how we fall in line with the updated frameworks. One of the things we're going to be working on starting this summer in kindergarten is taking the Tools of the Mind curriculum, looking at the new history and social studies frameworks and doing a crosswalk of those to see where the overlaps are. So much of what happens in Tools of the Mind and Jack and Annie is just full of great social studies lessons for students. So we really want to lay that out specifically and concretely where those overlaps are. First and second grade are the two places that don't have a perfect alignment between the new history and social studies frameworks. And I wanted to take an opportunity to explain that. If you look at the history and social studies frameworks, kindergarten through 5, it's almost all focused on United States history. And we, throughout the years in Arlington, before I've been here, developed really rich units on other places in the world. In first grade, there's been a unit on Africa and Mexico. In second grade, there's been a unit on Japan and El Salvador. And I personally feel, as the director of history and social studies, we would be doing our students a really big disservice if we took those units out of the curriculum. When we think about this idea of becoming global citizens, when we think about this idea of understanding people who are different than us and have different customs and cultures, I think it's essential that we keep these units in first and second grade. So they're going to remain there, and we are going to still cover the rest of the civics and geography standards that are laid out in the new frameworks. But that's kind of a decision in consultation with the first and second grade teachers that we felt like was really important for our students. In third grade, we've been continuing to work on integrating diverse narratives, as I mentioned earlier. We've been looking at a lot of the ways that ideas of race and gender played a role in the American Revolution. So that's been exciting for the third grade teachers to look at those new resources. In fourth grade, we're going to be looking at shifting around the curriculum to think about different ways for us to teach the U.S. regions. Right now, as you may know in the fourth grade, it's kind of this trek through each region of the United States. It's a lot of content for the fourth grade teachers to cover. So we want to integrate some project-based learning to consolidate some of that content. In fifth grade, we're integrating a new common assessment on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I'm very, very happy to say that this year all fifth grade students have done an in-depth unit on the Constitution and Bill of Rights. So we're way ahead of the state with the civic stuff in fifth grade. So I'm very, very happy about that and all the work that the fifth grade teachers have put into coming up with that common assessment. 6 through 12, not a lot of changes happening in sixth grade. Sixth grade is going to continue with our thematic approach to teaching ancient civs. We've seen how effective that's been. We've seen the connections that students are making. So we want to keep that there. A change in seventh grade for 2020 to 2021 is going to be a transition from our current world geography class to more of a global studies approach. So if any of you have had seventh graders, I'm sure you've come across maps and atlases at some point. These are really great tools, but we want to be looking in seventh grade at helping the students understand the world and why it is the way it is today. So we're going to be incorporating that geography with elements of culture, economics, and global civics. So it's going to move towards a thematic approach. This year we have 2 teachers that are piloting it, where they're looking at themes such as standard of living, health, energy resources, and they're learning about the geography and the regions of the world by going into those current day issues. We also want to look at some digital tools to help students understand geography, knowing that students might not always have access to an atlas, but are going to have access to Google Maps and Google Earth, and figuring out ways to integrate those tools into seventh grade. Eighth grade is the civics course. Not going to talk about that because they're going to do a great job on that. Grades 9 through 11, we're not making any changes to those course sequences until we figure out what's happening with any type of MCAS assessment at the high school level. We certainly don't want to organize our curriculum around a test, but at the same time, if there is going to be a test, we want to give our students the best opportunity to do well on it. So if the test ends up being in 11th grade U.S. history, then we want to make sure that our sequence matches up to make sure our students are best prepared for that. The last thing I'll talk about before I hand it off to the teachers is a 6 to 12 initiative that we've been working on, which is an examination of research practices and research in our classrooms. These are the essential questions that as a department we've been looking at this year, looking at what research means in the 21st century, and then looking at what authentic, transferable, adaptable research looks like. So I'm sure a lot of you remember doing research papers during your time, either in high school or college. And we're starting to think about what that looks like today. One of the things that we've been discussing at the high school is authentic audience. So this idea that traditionally you write a research paper, the only person that's seeing it is the teacher. Your audience is the teacher. And that's not exactly motivating people. It motivates people who want good grades. But this year we've been doing a lot of experimenting with authentic audience. So we've been asking students to first identify an audience. Once they've identified an audience for their research, they pick a format that best matches that audience, and then they pursue the research and integrate their sources into that. So this lays out the work that the department's doing. This was in the district goals for last year. It's a 2-year goal. So all the stuff in white that you can see up there is what we've already accomplished this year. And my type A brain made sure that we got through everything that we were supposed to get through this year. We started out the year by looking at our own attitudes about research. Then we did a really interesting student survey on research and got students' opinions on the research paper process. So every student in grades 6 through 11 took this survey, which provided us with a really rich amount of data to look at and to think about. Most recently, what we did is we did a root cause analysis to try to see the symptoms that we were seeing in terms of problems in the research process. And most recently, on Tuesday at our department meeting, we looked at the essential skills for research, and we've begun the process of sorting skill focus areas into grades so that we can really scaffold a research experience for students in grades 6 through 11. So next year, you can see we have a lot to do. We're going to be providing some direct instruction to students on these various research skills. But most exciting for me, I guess, is the common research tasks that we're going to do in grades 6 through 11. So the idea is that we're not just asking students to pull out these skills once a year when they're writing a paper, but we're constantly reinforcing them throughout the year and giving students ample amount of time to practice them. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and let my favorite 8th grade team talk about the new civics course.
This is okay here. Okay, I won't read every comment here, but so why civics and why 8th grade? The sort of beginning with just the dearth of basic knowledge about our government and rights, and of course there's been a big gap for students in terms of civics. So we'll be addressing that by teaching in 8th grade. In the pilot units that we've been doing this year, students have been very engaged and in discussing the civics issues, power, individual rights, and limits on those rights. We find, as we have been using some of our essential questions and connecting some civics ideas with our world history themes, the students are very interested, very engaged. They're finding their voice, they're finding how to use it in society. It gives us an opportunity to be bringing current events into the classroom more and have some in-depth discussion about these events. Of course, teaching students how to be responsible citizens, and they are thinking about their voting in the future. They're obviously will be talking about elections and everything leading up to elections, and they are very I think, anxious to be thinking about these issues and involved in articulating their viewpoints. Students need knowledge of how U.S. systems were developed and operate in order to contextualize the history of the U.S. as well as its interactions with the global community, historic and present. So there's the history piece as well as all of the concepts that we'll be talking about.
It's been nice to have the good fortune of having some leeway into this curriculum. It's a drastic change from what we're doing. Going from medieval world history to U.S. civics is night and day. So, we've really appreciated the opportunities that we've had this year, initiated by Danny and approved by the district here. That I think we've taken a two-tier approach here. We've really thought about how we're going to work here as a team. We've been getting some in-service days to organize how we want to approach it, how we think it's best for kids. But as importantly, we've had some really great professional development. Not that we've gone to every single one of these, but at least one of us has been to one of these. We've done everything from going to a course at Primary Source this year, which was fantastic, tons of resources. It's kind of nice, the whole state's in this together. So it's amazing the amount of resources there are and how more 21st century it is than what I remember doing myself in 8th grade. I remember having to do like a report on all 50 presidents and a paragraph on each. It's entirely different. Our focus is going to be on the students. Our focus is going to be on empowerment. Our focus is going to be understanding what's going on in the world here. And a lot of these courses really brought up some unique and interesting ways to do so. We are going to continue to do this throughout the summer also. I think we all bring something different to the table. I think we'll bring a very unique learning experience, which I'm certainly looking forward to, and everybody else here is too. In piggybacking on what Lucy said, the amount of engagement you get when kids are talking about what's going on around them is really special. We always jumped in during like times in our, of elections and primaries, but to be able to engage students of, what is their role in society? How can you be active? I think some of my biggest frustrations has been, for example, I taught U.S. history for about 5 years, and since 2003, 2004, I've taught world history, so it's been a while. But I used to always want the students to do the State of the Union address, and it became harder and harder the further and further we got away from U.S. history because I was starting at zero. Lots of kids didn't know what a representative, what a senator was, and not to have this background knowledge. This is a very influential time in their lives, so it's nice to lay down this foundation, so when they go to their next stage of being an active citizen, they can enjoy some of their rights now and continue to do so. So, I think I covered that. Next slide. And, we've basically also come up with our essential questions. These are definitely works in progress. I think we're going to really tune in on, as we see what the kids are grasping onto. I certainly see these as a work in progress. I'm not going to go through all this, but what is the purpose of government? What is a right? Do rights guarantee equality in practice? Or what responsibility do we have in ourselves and others? I really like how can we be proactive in order to be better in our world, and what causes people to seek change. These are really some of our bases here of moving forward and trying to get the students to really be self-reflective in what they're learning.
Hi, I'm Eric Backey. I currently teach 7th grade world geography at Ottoson Middle School, and I'm going to be moving up to the 8th grade to teach civics. I've done Generation Citizen as an after-school program at the Ottoson. You might have heard from some of my students, hopefully respectfully. They went to speak to Town Hall as part of their work with Generation Citizen for some of the projects. And I find that this age is just perfect to get students knowledgeable about what's going on around town. I think we do a wonderful job at the elementary school level of reinforcing their part in the community and showing them around town. And for some reason, we stop that in the teen years, and the town somehow becomes an enemy, that they're looking at them up to no good. And, getting them into public spaces around town helps them feel like they're really part of the community. So I'm hoping and looking forward to continuing that work with the 8th grade civics curriculum. An important part, too, before I talk about the units, this is probably my own personal remarks, but I wanted to thank the school committee for your support in adding another full cluster at the Ottoson. It has been a tremendous, tremendous help this year, and in the last couple years. I find myself saying hello to more students in the hallway, knowing more about their lives, and just being able to generally connect with them much better because of the reduced class numbers. So I really do appreciate that personally. For our units, as we're thinking about civics, the first thing is making sure that we include everybody in our discussion. We want everybody to feel like they belong in Arlington, and we want everybody to feel like they belong in America. And as they're discovering who they are, we want to see that. We want them to be able to see that reflected in what our country looks like and how it was created. And so that's really the focus as we go through, making sure that we hit topics with all the students. Teaching world geography, one of the most fortunate parts of it is that at some point in the year, I connect with a student's identity from their family, from where they're from, their own personal stories, and it's so enriching for them. So being able to bring that into this curriculum as well, I think will be really empowering for the students.
I have to get closer. Hi, guys. So I'm Nikki. And I'm going to talk about some of our sample lessons or sample learning experience we'll be using next year. We've already piloted some of these ideas already in our classroom, as Lucy already stated. We've really seen kids get really engaged and excited about civics, even though we're using it in a world history framework right now. These are some of the lessons and activities that I see my students becoming most engaged with and most excited to have discussions around. and really giving them a voice in the classroom that I hadn't seen previously. So it's really exciting to be switching gears. So we're going to be starting the year really with trying to help them understand and conceptualize what civics really is, because it can be a complicated idea or a mix of complicated ideas without some of that conceptualization of what civics is. So we're going to be starting by offering them an opportunity to imagine themselves on a stranded island with their peers and creating their own society from scratch and really learning what it's like to create law and order out of chaos, and why we have institutions, why we have civics, and learning some of these basic foundation ideas of what civics are that can use that vocabulary and those understanding throughout the course of the year. Some of the things we're going to be implementing with every unit that we'll be studying are specific case studies, Supreme Court cases, so they understand what the judicial process is and how our rights as citizens have developed within each unit we'll be studying, and specifically looking at not just your typical U.S. government type class you might be imagining, where we're just studying the structure of government, 3 branches of the government, and memorizing presidents and facts. It's much, much more than that. We'll definitely be embedding history along with it, really learning why these things, or why our rights have developed, why there are amendments, and what the history is behind these changes in our history, starting with our founding fathers and the philosophy of democracy, and moving to current events and really understanding where we are today and where we're moving forward in the future, and giving kids the opportunity to have civil discourse in a respectful and mature platform where they can learn from each other and learn to develop their own voice and become active citizens now and in the future, which for 21st century skills and getting our students to be prepared for the future, that really is our goal as teachers. So this curriculum aligns perfectly with why we teach. Can't say it better than that. Some of the things that we'll definitely be also incorporating, we'll be trying to implement some of the stuff that Eric has already been doing with his 7th graders and with his Generation Citizen after school club, and trying to teach kids how to be active citizens in the community. We'll definitely start small scale, and then as we learn through this curriculum and learn how best to implement that on a grade level, we'll be spreading every year to learn more how to make kids active and in the community again. But really it's teaching kids, learning and teaching them how to respectfully communicate and have civil discourse with each other about issues that impact them every day and they're passionate about. Here, Denny.
I should mention that this photo up there is from Eric's class right now, where he had the Attorney General, or Healy, come in and speak to students about issues around gun control. Students contacted the office. They completely organized it. It was really, really neat to hear them interact with her, and we were really thankful that she was able to come. And if you want to learn more about what the history department's doing, you can follow our Twitter account.
All right, questions and comments from the committee? Mr. Hayner?
First off, I'd like to commend you on your enthusiasm and excitement, and I know it's contagious. It goes back and forth from you to the kids. Quick question, and I apologize, I don't intend to put you on the spot. The issue on the Constitution and landmark cases, are you going to share with them the cases that weren't the best in the world, although they were landmarked, like the Dred Scott decision and the ones, the Plessy versus Ferguson, stuff like that? Good, I'm glad, because they can see both sides. Thank you.
Dr. Allison Hampy?
I had a couple of questions. First, I'm still confused about the relationship between the state standards and how you decide what to teach. I don't understand, is it coming down, you have to teach these different things and all, are they dictating, you're going to teach this, then that, then the other thing, or is it just you need to cover these different topics, or is it just teach civics?
That's a great question. Part of what the state has continued on with the history frameworks is what they call flexible options. So they dictate content standards and skill standards, but districts have a lot of leeway in how they want to implement those things. So just because a unit on the Explorers is in 4th grade, that's the recommended grade that it's taught in, but it might end up staying in 5th grade, for example. So there is, especially in the middle school sequence, different districts are doing the middle school sequence in different ways. Some are combining 6th and 7th grade into a 2-year global studies course. So there is some difference in the way that different districts are going to be doing their sequencing. In terms of the content, it lays out the suggested main units and main parts of the content, but then gives a lot of discretion to teachers to make some more specific decisions. So for example, when we think about the case study on the way that race has evolved over the course of the United States, history gives some leeway for teachers to decide, okay, Loving versus Virginia will be a good Supreme Court case that we want to help students explore that, Brown versus Board of Education. So that's kind of the way that it's laid out.
And then the other thing is, I can't quite tell from what you've got in the 8th grade civics, but I really hope that you are thinking about trying to utilize town meeting and just the stuff that comes to us each year. Each year you have a whole bunch of citizens in the town discussing things that are important to either a small subset or a whole big subset, and there's a lot of argument. There's just, it's like this ever-renewing amount of stuff to look at and think about. And I just think it doesn't exist everywhere, but we have it, and it seems like it's something we should take advantage of.
Do you want to say anything?
One of our units is very nicely titled, All Politics is Local. And it's definitely important. You know, Arlington has such a wonderful community feel, and in my work with the students so far, and the parents and families are very active in the community. So we definitely want to build on that, and that unit will go through a little more in depth of how town politics works. Part of the state standards, I believe, is, how did they phrase it? The project? So it's some type of action-based project. So how that looks is going to evolve, and we're working on that now. But what I'm doing with my students this year in sort of preparation is based on my work with Generation Citizens. So they're picking a local issue that they care about and then making change happen on it. So they research what is going on behind that issue, what's being done on that issue, and then they find the government outlets and channels to get that done. 6 years ago, perhaps, maybe a little longer, we got some trash barrels put in Monotony Rocks Park, and we used, we used the Parks and Rec Department, we used the Public Works Department, and so town meeting is an excellent example. There's also a lot of other doors into the town government, and so the students will be knocking on them, hopefully.
Thank you.
Dr. Seuss?
Yes, a couple questions. I actually have to say, though I remember the 6th grade curriculum, I remember the 7th grade curriculum, I actually don't remember what was in the 8th grade curriculum. So what is being pushed out?
Castles.
Castles.
The castles. Oh, I forgot about the castles. Oh, yeah. Great, okay, got it. Got it, okay. Okay, so now I understand. Okay.
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I remember
Game
the
of Thrones
castles.
is
I don't
gone.
remember what was happening underlying that. Okay. Then about the 7th grade, so I wasn't a fan of the maps, as lots of parents aren't. But one of the things I thought was done really well is that sort of the connection between how, as maps change, how that's a representation of geopolitical stuff that's happening. So a lot of discussion of like World War I that happened, which I thought was really interesting perspective of connecting the geography. And with the focus on sort of current stuff happening, is that being pushed out a little bit in 7th grade?
The 7th grade curriculum, we're still piloting and figuring out the right mix between the world geography and the new global studies curriculum. One of the places of emphasis that we're going to be thinking about is the human geography part of global studies, so thinking about migration patterns, and a lot of that is rooted in the history as well.
Right.
So I would imagine that a lot of those really good connections are going to remain in the curriculum.
And then I just have one more question. So you look at the 1st and 2nd grade, so we have Japan and El Salvador and Mexico, and then you have Africa, which has over 50 countries. So I'm wondering, El Salvador is like a small snapshot of what, is going on south of us, and Mexico too. But is, like, could we, so I talk about Western Africa or something, focus, because obviously we're not covering the entire world in those grades. But just Africa just feels really big.
So that's another good question. The first grade teachers have been working in PD this year on revising that first grade curriculum, specifically the Africa unit. This started out as a project to teach Africa in a more culturally proficient way. So we wanted to move the study of Africa beyond the animals that live there and some of kind of the mystifying that we do around African culture. So it started with that, and then we decided to completely overhaul the whole unit on Africa. I always tell the first grade teachers the biggest thing if a first grader can remember that Africa is not a country, then like that's a big win in my book. But what they're going to start to look at is the overall continent and the different regions of it, different climates, looking at different geographical features, and then we're asking them to do an in-depth case study on one country. So a lot of that sometimes is dictated by different families that we have in our elementary schools. So in one of the classrooms I know we had a family from Ghana, so they came in and they did a lot of work and did an in-depth study on Ghana. We also want to capitalize on some of the expertise we have in the first grade teachers who have traveled to some places or know these countries really well. So it's the idea of looking at the bigger part and then zooming in and seeing kind of the universal and the particular piece of it.
Okay, good, thanks.
Mr. Thielman.
So what's going to happen to medieval history? Is that going to, is that going, is it going to be in the rest of the curriculum? Are you going to put it in high school or nobody cares?
Well, that's another interesting thing is that the state mandated this new civics course in the 8th grade, but they also didn't say where that curriculum is going. They made some suggestions about a 4-year requirement for history in high school, moving into the high school, but my general consensus from talking to department heads throughout the state is there's not a lot of palatability towards a 4-year history requirement in high school, mainly just because of the AP courses and electives that students take their senior year. So I think what we're going to do temporarily until we figure out a better solution is we're going to do a nice crash course on the World History 1 curriculum at the beginning of 9th grade, Modern World History. And then again, we'll see what happens with the MCAS. I have these like grand visions of merging U.S. history and world history together into just one study of it all together. And that would provide some space to put that World History 1 curriculum in. But I don't know if we're going to do that yet. That's like my pipe dream.
And to what extent were teachers across the state involved in the development of the curriculum, or the standards?
So they had a...
and were you involved in as a department head?
I was not involved in the frameworks. They had a panel of different teachers, higher ed professors and scholars that were part of the rewriting of the frameworks, and then they sent them out for public comment. And they were decently responsive to that public comment. For example, in 3rd grade, in the original standards, it made only one reference to African Americans within the context of slavery, and they got overwhelming feedback that they needed to broaden that scope. So that was in the revised version that got passed in June. So there was public feedback on it from not only teachers, but also parents and anybody who wanted input on it. But there's a lot of interesting parts of the framework as well that we're trying to figure out.
Final question, is it going to be aligned with, is there going to be a state, is it going to be a MCAS?
We don't know yet.
We don't know, okay.
So the only thing we know right now is that in 8th grade, they want a civics project. The DESE is supposed to be releasing some more information on those requirements in June. And there's also going to be a required civics project at the high school level. Again, the details of that are a little vague, but a lot of the civic stuff we already have going on at the high school, so I'm not too stressed out about that.
But to Denny's credit, if you can just talk about the common assessments that you're looking to pilot for next year.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we are trying to figure out is what is the baseline knowledge that students have on social studies when they leave elementary school. So that's why we've used this common assessment in 5th grade. Because we don't have any type of MCAS, it's hard for us to necessarily know what are students learning and absorbing with the content and with the skills that we're trying to build in elementary school. So I'm really excited that it's going to provide us with our first window and lens into seeing where we might need to make some changes in terms of instruction at the elementary level. At the high school and middle school, we've always had common projects, and at the high school, common final exams and whatnot. But at the elementary level, it'll be interesting to see that information.
So once again, we remain one step ahead of the state.
Wait, you guys are good.
Ms. Morgan?
So as a parent watcher, we've only made it as far as 6th grade, and the ancient civilizations is extraordinary, really rich, really exciting. I'm so glad that we finally got there. I'm really happy you guys, that at some point you're gonna get into the elementary a little bit more, 4th grade. I've got 2 4th graders right now. Man, that state study is pretty old and pretty archaic. My kids came home today and they were like, oh, we have a homework pass. We're just going to pass out. They just took a homework pass on the entire Western United States. Right? I mean, coming from Oregon, like my heart like fell into like 50 pieces. And I was like, wait, you're not going to learn the capital of Oregon? No, we have a homework pass. So anyway, it just like, it needs a lot of work. I'm so hopeful that there's other things they're learning about those states at school, maybe. But like it will be really exciting when some of the rigor and the focus that I think is so extraordinary in grades 6 through 12, if we can like get some of that in like to some of the upper elementary grades, that would be exciting. So.
I mean, that's the plan. We've done a lot of work in 5th grade the past 2 years. And on Monday, we had a meeting with Rod and we were scheduling our elementary PD calendar for next year. And a lot of my work next year in elementary level is in 4th grade.
Awesome.
Yeah, I don't know what all's out west. Lewis and Clark went there. They turned around and came back, you know. The one thing I love about the civics in getting that in is being able to build from local to state to federal. Because, I mean, growing up in New York, the form of government is different in that the local government is either a town council, village council, city council. So you don't have the advantage of having a local legislature right in town. And I don't know how much the 8th grade is aware of what's on the town meeting warrant, but I think that that's sort of a very tactile thing that they can get their hands around. And it's a good way to introduce them into the legislative process and then applying it going up to how it breaks down a little at the state and totally dissolves in the federal.
You can't teach that.
But I'm just sort of wondering now that you talked about what kids were interested in a while ago. Have their interests in terms of what's going on within the community or even beyond shown changes or more sophistication as a result of the times we're in or the curriculum we're using?
Thank you, Denny. So the first projects that we did in Generation Citizen focused a lot on highly local problems, I think I would say. The example of the park, also we had 2 years where we worked on getting crosswalks around the school. This year, and in the previous years, it moved to raising the minimum wage to help with homelessness and poverty. This year, each class is doing a different goal. So one of them, and a big topic from last year that the Generation Citizen coordinator didn't feel comfortable talking about, but I felt comfortable talking about it with my class this year, was gun control. And you saw we had Attorney General Maura Healey come talk to the class. So I definitely have seen that the students, perhaps it's just their use of social media and the internet more, but they are totally aware of the issues that we're talking about. And they're talking about it too, so we need to give them the tools and the ability to engage with it at the appropriate levels, which sometimes is local, because this national conversation, it's really going to hit the ground in the towns and in the states. So, thank you.
All right. Oh, Dr. Altampieva.
Sorry, I just wanted to circle back to town meeting too and put a plug in for Mr. Hayner and his. No, I think he really should get credit. He's been doing the mock town meetings for the 3rd grades, and I don't know how much of the town you're now covering. 4, yeah. It's something I feel all of our children would benefit from. Mine was not lucky enough. Neither of them were lucky enough to have it. But I think it's doing something at that age and giving them an idea of what's going on sets the seed for everything else that you're doing as you go through. So
I appreciate that, but I also want to recognize, I stopped active teaching full-time 20 years ago, and I found it difficult to get everything done 20 years ago, and I cannot imagine what you folks are dealing with now with everything else. MCAS was just starting. So I appreciate the teachers and able to do it, and it's exciting, and your enthusiasm, again, is very contagious, and it snowballs with the kids. When the kids respond, you can do more, and it goes back and forth. But it's very difficult to get it all in, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows, able to do it with some, others are not always, because they have, it's not that they don't want to do it, it's finding the time to do it. It's just tremendous, and I applaud you for all you're doing. You're definitely not doing it for the bucks. So.
One thing I'll mention that's related to that is that our Hardy fifth graders just got done with the field trip last week to the Ted Kennedy Institute, where they were senators and sat in the mock Senate chambers and debated whether or not the school days should be longer or not. So that's another example of the way that we're utilizing place-based learning. And they had a fantastic time.
The longer school day went?
Longer day or shorter?
Longer.
Really?
Yep.
Awesome.
But less
recess time.
More recess time. Forgot that.
All right, so I just have one quick question. So with the changes in the 7th grade, this is what I've asked you last year, does this mean they will no longer be required to learn capitals of countries and things like that?
I think it's going to be so incorporated because when we talk about the global issues, we're going to be looking at the regions, and with that study of the region will be some of those map skills. But as I mentioned, it's also knowing, we want students to know, or I'll speak for myself, I would love students to know generally where countries are in the world. Yep. I think with technology, that memorization is less important now, but it's about giving them, like I mentioned, the tools with Google Maps and Google Earth to be able to zoom in on those capitals, to see where they are in relation to other land masses and resources. So to some extent it probably will, but that like rote memorization is what I would love to move away from a little bit.
Yes, and I definitely would agree with that as quickly as possible. Yes.
I just want to mention that with the world changing constantly, some of the names that I memorized don't exist anymore. They've changed and it become, I'm trying to remember, Rhodesia is no longer in existence. And just, I found it difficult for a long time to pronounce Zimbabwe. I can now handle it now. But a lot of the things change and stuff. And if you ever get a chance to see the Maporium at the museum, Africa, I think, had 6 countries listed on it on that in the 19th century.
We did a field trip there.
Wow, cool. It's a cool place.
Anyway.
All right, so thank you. So as we did with the curriculum, other curriculum changes, we do need to accept these changes by accepting the report of the curriculum.
Move to accept the report.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? Unanimous. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out and giving us a snapshot on what's going on with the updated standards. Thank you very much.
You're cool.
Okay, next on our agenda is discussion of district goals for 2019-2020. Bodie?
I think before I begin these remarks, I think the one thing that you can see just in the 2 presentations this evening is just how dynamic the educational culture is of this district. The culture is of always looking in how can we improve what we're doing. It's dynamic, it's passionate on the part of the teachers, it's well thought out, and it's strategic in terms of whether we are meeting state standards or what would be best practices in having all students be able to achieve at very high levels. I particularly like there's a lot to appreciate, but more and more of our students participating in honors level courses, AP level courses, I think is one of the great trends that we've seen in the high school. And also, as you heard a couple of weeks ago, the effort to move from curriculum B to curriculum A. Again, providing the supports for students as well as increased rigor. So as we look at our district goals, they are done in the context of, let me see, does this work? No, that's fine, it's fine. When we look at our district goals, we look at it through many lenses as we think about where we're going next year. And one of the important lenses is the vision of students as learner and global citizen that we have developed over the last few years. The school committee was participated in that effort, as well as teachers and community members, students for that matter. We don't look at this as a static document, but one that's dynamic and really helps us focus in what we're doing at a K-12 level. So we have, I'm not going to go through this, is on our website. We've talked a lot about this in past years, but these are the characteristics that what we'd like our students to demonstrate. We have a vision of a student as global citizen. Again, these are competencies that stretch both in terms of content, but mostly looking at practice skills. You've heard us speak, and you've heard curriculum leaders talk about transferable skills. What is embedded in all of those, the vision of a student as learner and global citizen, are these key competencies that we know that are going to be so important as our students both go through the Arlington Public School System, but in preparation for the world that they are in currently and that the world that they will be entering as they leave here. I think there is a number of books out there and statistics about what we would expect to see in the future, but I think one of the things that really made me think a lot in the last few years is the expectation that our kindergarten students today are most likely going to be having jobs in their lives that we haven't even thought about. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of skills that they're going to need are very different than the skills that schools operated under or valued even 20 years ago, 50 years ago, certainly very different than the early 20th century. But it's worth reading these because they're very important, and they actually, when you look at the standards in social studies, history, science, math, you will see these practice standards, these dispositions, and throughout all of the standards. The flexibility and adaptability, having a global and cultural awareness, creativity and imagination, critical thinking, creative problem solving. In fact, we just heard it at a meeting yesterday how a lot of companies in Kendall Square, this is one of the key things that they're looking for. Can a prospective employee demonstrate that they have creative problem-solving skills? Having expressive and receptive communication skills. Can they learn? Can they communicate? Can they listen? Can they communicate? Social responsibility and ethics, which you've heard a lot about tonight with our social studies history presentation. Digital literacy and self-awareness and self-efficacy. So when we look at what we're doing as a school system, we look at what we want our students, what kind of skills, what kind of content knowledge that we know now, and that could even change as we go through the next years as our society changes at the rapid pace that it currently is. But these are the contexts in which we think about district goals. So that brings us to where we are in terms of how we structure district goals in here. A number of years ago, the school committee and administration had a retreat and developed some overarching goals. Mm-hmm. They're in basically 4 categories. The first 2 goals are probably 2 of the most important. around student achievement, and the second one has to do with professional development. This past year, we developed a couple of focus for the work around student achievement. The first focus was looking at our curricula to make sure that we are designed in response to district vision of students as learners and global citizens. You've heard a lot about that tonight. And remains in alignment with state standards and coherent within each discipline. This is not a static thing. A curriculum is dynamic, it changes, it grows. We're always trying to improve what we do. So what you received in your packet, and I'm not going to put all of these up because it would just be overwhelming, but in each one of the discipline areas of the district, we have identified what are some very important things that we need to work on next year in order that our students progress and develop the content knowledge and skills that we want them to be able to do. So we could talk about specific ones, and I think that perhaps, when we're going to have a discussion, I think at the Curriculum and Instruction Subcommittee meeting after this to talk about what things we might want to add or refine as we go forward. But in this document, and it's available in our packet, in your packets, and therefore available to the public, there are different focuses for next year. And you've heard what the ELA, our literacy group, as well as our social studies history department are working on. So that's that general area. The other objective we've had a focus on, and I don't think this is going to change for a number of years because it's a multi-year goal, and that is to develop the social emotional skills that our students need through age-appropriate SEL instruction that includes an awareness of cultural bias, and by learning in classrooms where responsible decision-making, empathy, and the importance of positive relationships are the norm. And we will continue this work next year. And, there is there's work that's being done in teams at all of the schools, and that work will continue. The other major goal is staff excellence and professional development. Every initiative that we are going to have next year is paired with professional development. And I think you heard that tonight, that when we move forward with some curricular change, it is backed with professional development, because you can't move forward without that pairing. And so when we look at the professional development around all of the different initiatives, they fit into it fits into absolutely every aspect of our school system. And again, a delineation of all of those are in the packet that you received. So we're trying as we move from this year to next year to build on the work we've done already, to build on the understandings that we have developed as well in terms of the lenses of learning and the lenses of our vision, so that every year we incrementally move forward in the work that we're doing and toward the vision that we've all agreed upon. And that actually is something I think we need to talk about at another time, but not tonight, is how we're going to perhaps tweak that vision, because I think that there's some things that perhaps need to be added or restated in it. But that's another topic for another night. So when we develop district goals, these become the focus for how we link our school improvement plans at each school, and then personal goals. The other goal that we're going to have under staff excellence is this is a goal we've had every year, and I think that that's not going to change for some time until we see the kind of progress we want, that we will seek to increase the overall diversity of the district staff from the current numbers by recruiting qualified teachers, administrators with diverse backgrounds. So that will continue. So the next two goals, this one has to do with infrastructure, educational environment, sort of the systems and the nuts and bolts of the school system. And one of the goals, continuation of the work that we have been doing this year with a actual renewed focus next year, is how we use data to inform change, inform instructional practice. And so the first two goals here, objectives for next year, has to do with the work that we're doing to provide, to actually create the infrastructure for having a data bank. And in fact, I may let, you might want to talk a little bit about this, Dr. McNeil, in a second. And then secondly, that we would have data teams in every school building. We've already begun that work, and we've been looking for a way to create the tools in which the data, and this is very broad, can be available for these teams. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, so as Dr. Bodie alluded to, that we're trying to look at the types of components that need to be within the infrastructure in order to utilize data. And so one of the things, one of the components is making data accessible to all teachers and easily accessible, so they don't have to go searching for it. So that was the motivation for researching and identifying a way of doing that, and that's why right now we have the district data bank, and we piloted as an expanded pilot at the elementary level with our literacy assessment scores, and so we have that firmly in place. And now I'm going to have discussions with our math and ELA directors in order to identify other assessments that need to go into the data bank from the elementary and middle school level. And then we're going to work our way up to high school. So that will provide teachers with immediate access so that they can look at that data, translate it, discuss it, and use it to inform their practice. And another part of that is to provide district administrators with a consistent way of looking at data. So AEF, so I've written a grant to AEF, and so we have currently a course, a data-wise course that all district administrators are taking this year. And they will have, so we'll have a consistent way of looking at data, and then that a second cohort of individuals that will take the course next year will be coaches and other district support personnel. So with that in place, we'll have a way of accessing the data, and then we'll have a consistent way of viewing data to inform our practice. So those are two of the components that we're working on right now to provide that infrastructure.
All right. And this is the main focus for this overarching goal. As I said, we've been working on it this year. The course that we're taking will go into next year, and I think it's been very helpful in helping curriculum leaders and principals get so we all have a common language, common approach in terms of how we're going to use data. But it's so part of our district culture. I think that this is just taking us to a new level with this work. And then the last particular goal, overarching goal, has to do with operations, communications, and stakeholder engagement. So in this particular goal, which has been something similar in past years, is that, assuming, or if the override for the high school passes this next month, next year will be a very intense year in the next level of design. And that will involve a lot of effort on the part of not only the building committee, but the high school teachers. This is when you really spend a lot of time on thinking about, all of the technology, the furniture, the fixtures, the final design components. Is this the exact right place for this? It's a very intense part of the next stage of this process. And it's also the time when we start beginning the construction designs. So it would not seem, perhaps this is being a little bit anticipatory, I grant you that, but I think it's important that you recognize how intense next year will be in this next phase. And Mr. Thielman probably can agree on that one.
I can agree.
Yes. All right, so, but in this particular goal, we have other ones as well in terms of other initiatives within the district. And one of the things we actually have thought about, have talked about as a goal in past years, but just sometimes that was just too ambitious. We've begun the review of essential standards, transferable skills at our different grade levels. But what we really do need to have is a place on our website where the elementary curriculum can be available for all parents. And that's, I think, a very important one, particularly when we're having the changes that you're hearing tonight. And then the other one is that we want to look at, this is really a goal about what we're going to do with the high school as we go through the next few years. Either way, what happens with respect to what in June is that there is a different level of focus, and I think the facilities subcommittee is going to need to be involved in this as well as we look at the planning, the continuing maintenance for the upkeep of the high school. When should you do something, when should you not, depending on the outcome of where we are in June. And so that gives you a broad view of what we're looking to do next year. It's consistent with what we're doing next year and just moving us further along in those efforts. So tonight was just meant to be an overview, to give you the curriculum leaders and the principals have worked very hard over the last month or two on and thinking through, talking to their department as to exactly what they're going to be doing to further us with both the work in goal number 1 and the professional development in goal number 2. So I think at this point I would recommend that the next phase of this development would be that we'd have a curriculum and instructions subcommittee to talk a little bit more in depth about these so that by the time we have 2 more meetings, that we can approve these district goals for next year. And then the schools will begin their own school improvement plans linked to that.
Mr. Hayner?
I would like to commend you, Dr. Boney, and everybody's work. I would ask you to consider where appropriate specific dates of when you or the group can report back and take the broad scope and make them as, how can I put it, more concise with specific behavioral objectives when appropriate. Some of these are broad, but some of them I think can, when we talk about curriculum or specific actions from different groups, when they may report back to us to make an assessment, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and so that we can continue to support them.
I think that we could set up a schedule. Mr. Carden and I can do that of, when different groups will come in. I think while you might want to hear some of in the fall, they've really got to go through a good chunk of the year in order to be able to report back. Now, some of these are self-evident what the evidence would be and what the action is.
Right, that's why I said those things that are appropriate for specific evidence to share with us of success. And I don't mean this negatively. Some of these things may not work out. We're looking at them right now, and we find out later things, they need more support, or we might rechange. The state may stick its nose in like it does sometimes and refocus us. But I think this is a great beginning, and I look forward to seeing the end results. Thank you.
Can I comment on what?
Sure.
So just, if you look at the bottom, piggybacking on what you said, if you look at the last page of the goals, we added kind of like a disclaimer, if you will, that some of the goals may change based upon
That's why I added
teacher
what I said.
input and student data assessment that we acquire throughout the year. And I think that's what Dr. Bodie was talking about, how dynamic they are.
I think it's important for us to also, and the people to hear this, that there was a necessary change or modification.
Right.
That it just didn't get forgotten. We know it, the public needs to hear it too. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Asmanampi, you had your hand up.
Okay. Thank you very much for this. I had one question just about District Goal 3.1 and 3.2, the data goals. This isn't really part of the goal, but as part of your work, I would be interested in seeing a presentation at school committee on examples of how the data is actually being used. Now, maybe you're going to fudge things, so, I mean, I'm not looking for student identifiable data or anything we shouldn't be hearing, but just examples of how a teacher may use this data bank and, or the building principals use it, or, just, I'd like to hear how the data is being used. And, real specific kind of, how does it affect a student? How does it affect a classroom? The different permutations that I think are probably available.
So while we're on the data bank, just a quick question. Is there a third-party tool or something that you're using to pull the data together, or are you doing it in-house?
So it's part of a package that comes with Google. So there's a data studio, and we have contracted a consultant who is very adept at using that data studio. So we work with him in order to provide spreadsheets that teachers can utilize to input their data, and then he'll organize it into the data bank. And so it comes back to us in a very usable form, and then teachers can access it by through a link. And so it's very easy. And so we're still working on it. Like, this is the first year. Like I said, it was an expanded pilot, and we're tweaking it as we're going along, and we're getting teacher input. And so we're finding out, what works and what doesn't work. And so as we move along, I look at, I just see the potential in utilizing this for teachers.
I just want to let you know that we have looked over the last couple of years at different tools and have been disappointed with them. So this was, I think this is going to be very successful. We might share with them a template for it.
Well, so when Susan, I don't know if you remember, when Susan Bisson came, our Director of Digital Literacy, she did provide a link to a PowerPoint, and there is a screenshot, and I can provide that for you as well. So you'll have it from a recent email. So I can email that to you, the link to that particular PowerPoint or that slideshow, and then you'll see just how it works, and it's an explanation of how it works.
Great, thank you.
So,
Dr. Seuss?
I have a question too on the data bank. So at the end of next year, where do we hope to be in terms of how much stuff will be up in the data bank, how many areas are covered? I know the focus is going to be English and math. What else will we have to do in the coming years?
Well, the sky's the limit. So as Denny was talking about the common assessment that he's piloting for social studies in the 5th grade, that's an example of something that we can add to the data bank. So now that we have this tool, I'm asking the curriculum leaders to start thinking about what type of assessments. So other things that we're looking at, unit assessments, how can we utilize those assessments, score them in a way that when you look at the data that's in the data bank, that you're able to make some type of determination of what it means. So we're not only looking at the data that we're putting in there, but we're also looking at how we're utilizing the way that we're evaluating that data and how we're scoring it. So
But is it fair to say it's a multi-year project, right? It's not just, right? Obviously, it's going to be continually added to and tweaked forever.
From here on out,
But I mean,
right.
in terms of getting a substantive core, it's a multi-year project. It's not just, it won't be done in 1 year. No.
Correct.
Right, okay.
Correct,
Okay.
that is correct.
Okay. And then I have just one comment. So I love the idea that we're going to get this over the district curriculum and put it on the website. I know we have talked about it before. I urge you to use the school committee as resources. Sometimes we can pick up on phrasing that might cause people to be upset or something, that we can often, look at it and give comments back on how things are worded, for example. And
Absolutely.
I urge you to use us as a resource in that way.
Absolutely. I envision that, or I'm assuming that we'll have a lot of discussion in the curriculum and instruction subcommittee, and I'll probably be presenting like multiple drafts that we can look at in order to determine what, a final draft that will go onto the website. So absolutely.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Shipman.
Yeah, I'm looking at this as a central office administrator, and my hair is starting to hurt, because it feels very diverse and very ambitious, and there's just so much sitting here. I'm saying, how are we going to track all of this? And that really is my concern. There's so much here, rather than hitting us with a couple of really high leverage things that are going to be indicators. I mean, there's just so much content here. How are we going to watch all these moving parts, and how's that going to be communicated back to us in a systemic manner that we can almost go to Google Docs or wherever in Google Studio and see a dashboard of how this is going? Because I can't imagine keeping track of all of this over the next year.
I'm not going to say that it's not ambitious. It is ambitious, and every year our curriculum leaders and principals are very ambitious about how they want to move forward and improve. When you talk about high leverage, that's sort of how I think about it too. What are the kinds of things that we can do that are going to have the most effect? And one thing that I think that there's complete agreement on with everyone on the administrative teams is the importance of the work we're doing around social emotional learning. So when you do that, that's the big concept. But how it manifests itself is going to be different in different disciplines, and so you will see that it's a component. The other part of it is when we look at the vision of what we want to see. It's really, other districts call it the portrait of a graduate. Maybe that's how we'll evolve in terms of how we want to talk about it. But if we want to have students be able to have the skills that we've identified that are really important, where does that happen? Everybody has to take a part of that as they move through our school system. So you have a focus, but then you have all of these individual actions. That's what we're trying to show you in this. Every department has to own it. So one of the things I've encouraged principals to do, particularly at the elementary level, is that when you have a school improvement plan and you have a concept that you're trying to work on, whether it's reading or math, depending upon the data that you think you need to have a focus on, what's the kindergarten going to do? What's the first grade going to do? Everybody takes a part of it, because if you don't do it that way, this is the big idea, then it's somebody else's responsibility. But it's everyone's responsibility, and everyone is being held accountable for the work they do in their area.
Yeah, and you can see that, I see how a lot of it's broken down. But I think one of the essential things for a set of district goals or overarching goals that we're all working towards, that if I were to stop a 7th grade math teacher over the Addison and say, hey, what's the district goals? I'd get boom, boom, that we're working on this, this, and this, and it's going well here, and we're just starting here. And I can't imagine anyone, including the leadership team, being able to go, what are the district goals, and being able to rattle them all off.
I think.
Yeah, it just feels huge to me.
Well, that may be something we could talk about in committee. I would say that if you talk to a teacher, they would say we're thinking about social emotional learning and cultural competency. Would that be pretty accurate?
I think that's accurate. I also want to remind you, please send the district goals to the teachers in the district, because I think a lot of teachers would say, well, this is the stuff we're working on, but I don't know what the goals are, because they're never communicated directly to us.
Well, they're supposed to be coming from the teachers through the departments.
All right.
This is the first I've seen of any of this.
All right.
Well, if it comes from the teachers through the departments, then it has to cycle back.
Yeah, it cycles back. Yeah.
It's got to cycle back. And that's, I'm, you know, what the goals are going to be involves a lot of introspection on the part of the staff. And, but in order for it to work, I mean, on our view, I'm not going to go down here and say your 3.2 is off, because I don't live in your buildings. I don't live in the buildings. I don't interact with the teachers on a day-to-day basis. What we can do on this level is look upon it as a systemic effort and do what we can to encourage it and promote it and support it. But the view of it from the folks who are doing the actual work really has to be one where we know what we're talking about and we know specifically what the goals are that we're working on. And I just worry that we've got, in this document here, is just too big, too disparate. Now, maybe it breaks down so that we only give the math teachers at the Ottoson the things that directly relate to them is page 1, and then if you want to see what else is going on, here it is. But there's got to be some sort of systemic thing where we all know where we're at and how we're moving along. It just feels almost unmanageable to me.
Can I
go right ahead?
So, if you look at goal objective 1.1, that's the overarching goal that you're speaking of. But how that, and as Dr. Bodie was talking about it, how that is translated for each one of the departments. If you break it down and look at each one of the content areas, there's only 1 or 2. And in some areas, because the work is going on right now and we want to extend that into the next year, you'll see that there's maybe 3 or 4 as it relates to the different levels. But I was very explicit and worked with the curriculum leaders to make sure that we're only choosing 1 or 2 for each content area, because we're looking for that depth, and we want to make sure that the things that we're working on, we're taking care of all aspects of it. And also, we don't want to overwhelm teachers with a lot of different things going on. So, you know, we've tried to be very, very mindful of the fact that, just as you were talking about it, be very mindful of not having too much on our plate in order to accomplish. So if you look at it and kind of digest it, you'll see that goal objective 1.1 is just translated into different actions in the various content areas. So that's why it might seem to be a lot, but in actuality, it's not.
Yeah, that's why I sort of look forward to seeing it and talking a little more in a subcommittee meeting, and maybe just putting it up on a board with stickies or something and figuring out exactly where things are going, and then figuring out how to track it. Because I think that's a key for us is how are we tracking it? How do the levers of change that we have in our hands come to play, and what can we do to support it?
Sure.
Right, so you're, perhaps maybe should not have given you all of the different ways the departments are doing, because the real focus of 1.1 is we have to have a curricula that is aligned with certainly the state standards, but is dynamic and meets the vision of what we want is for our students. Here's for an example. So under ELA, we one of the focus for next year in grade 3 is talking about these unit of studies, and very specifically. Tonight you heard the work that the coaches are doing with grade 3 level teachers. The curriculum, you know, if you're looking for, we're going to focus on reading, as in that.
No, that's sort of meaningless. Yeah,
it's sort of meaningless, exactly, because our students experience lots of different curricula in their day, and by putting this in here, is this what we're going to do in grade 3? We're trying to be very mindful that grade 3 teachers are going to be working on this readers workshop, but we're not going to have a separate math goal there, because we want the focus and intent to be there. So we're trying to be very mindful. I know the curriculum leaders are trying to be very mindful of of not overburdening teachers.
Yeah, this may be a mapping issue, that
be a
in this
mapping
format,
issue.
I'm not seeing it.
So there's the two things, the two big things. There's a the curriculum that we're doing, and the other is social emotional learning. For student achievement, we believe that students are going to learn best in environments in which they feel safe, and they are appreciated, they're supported. And so a lot of effort has gone into that. What happens in a kindergarten classroom or a sixth grade classroom is very different. And we want to acknowledge that in all the different ways we're doing it. But is the theme the same? Yes. The theme is the same. And you heard it tonight for social studies. The teacher's been working on the curriculum changes in social studies history, which that's what the social studies department is doing, right? Yep, a lot of PD. So they may not have seen what's going on in ELA, and they may not have seen what's going on in performing arts, but certainly the people in those departments know what they're working on.
See, I'm going to just be very critical in that of myself, in that I am very much a spatial analytical visual learner, and to get a whole bunch of words either being talked to or read to, or in text like this where it feels like it wants to be spatial, is taking me longer to get a grasp on it. And I can see that I'm dealing with little pieces. I'm just
maybe we should think about some way of doing that.
Yeah.
Ms. Keys, you had.
I just wanted to comment, because we write goals as teachers every year, and for every goal, you have your goal, your objectives, and your action plan. That's what this is. Is you've got the action plan combined with the goals, which is different than what we've done in the past, but I really appreciate having it broken down like this.
Okay.
Ms. Morgan?
So Paul is a visual mapping kind of learner, and I'm a relationship learner. I have to understand how things are stitched together with other things. And so, and we can talk more about this in the subcommittee, but when I look at the 1.1 ELA grade 1, we're going to do DIBELS, academic phenome segmentation, and then I look in special education, and we're going to do assessment data gathered from the specific testing battery designed to develop a reader profile. I'm assuming those are all kind of tied up together with the work with English curriculum leaders to identify formative assessments to add to the district data bank. I think those are all like this, but I need to figure out a way to see those. We can deploy them to different goals, but I need to see the sum of the whole before I see the sum of the parts. Does that make sense at all? This gives us the sum of the parts. It gives us the pieces, put in different boxes, but I've lost the forest for the trees, right? I think I'm sure the forest is there. I'm sure it's beautiful. I can only see the trees here, so I just need help. And it doesn't have to be written. We can talk about it more. I just need help seeing the forest so that I can understand why these trees are where they are. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense, and it's a perfectly good observation. So we debated this, whether we would put down saying that what we really want over the next few years is to work toward that all third grade students are at reading benchmark at the end of third grade. So if you have that vision of what you want to have happen, then what do you have to do? And these are the kinds of things that we've identified after a lot of thinking about it as to what you need to do. And we've come to the conclusion with working with an outside consultant that the current assessments that we do are probably not for reading, or not probably give us as much information as we need. And for certainly students with particular learning disabilities, we want to see what their reading profile is so that we can then match the profile to the learning, to the intervention. But the idea is, this is what we want to have for all students, and we have a ways to go. I mean, we're definitely improving, but what are the next things to move us closer? And so perhaps that when we meet in committee, we can sort of talk about what is behind this.
Yeah, if we that sounds like the forest. right there, right? You just gave it to us in like 45 seconds, which is fabulous, right? The forest is we want all third graders reading at benchmark by the end of third grade.
Right, and
Right?
it's going to take a couple of years
Oh,
of working.
absolutely. Of course it is. It's going to take a long time because it's really, really hard to do. But these are the trees that make up that forest.
Yes, and they're all under that, I mean, maybe that's, we should have layers of this to say, under 1.1, this is our vision of what we'd like to see happen, and these are the things we're going to do in ELA, special education, and so forth. We could do it that way, too.
All right. Yeah, so I agree with what's been said, that I think some of them are just a little bit more detailed. It's almost like you're listing everything you're going to do, like for professional development, the one actually related to the, I just lost it. Goal 3? No, goal 2. 2.1. Sorry, yes. So the one related to the new Dibbles, whatever.
Dibbles.
Is that the literacy coaches are going to meet during early release time. Well, that's what regularly happens during early release time, right? I mean, there's always professional development during early release time. So I don't think you need to, I would say that some of the detail is too much detail. And so sort of a more Dibbles goal without the details of how you're going to implement Dibbles, right?
So I just want to interject here. There's a certain format in which you write goals, and it's called the SMART goal format. All of these are written in a SMART goal format. So you're asking us to, like, you would be asking us to change the structure, which how the individual's goals are under the bigger, more global goal of goal 2 and goal 2.1. We're writing it this way for a specific reason, so that when teachers read it, they know exactly where we're moving towards. And
so the goal that you're going to implement Dibbles is great. That's perfect. I don't think I need the detail that there's going to be this rollout on this day, and then this training on this day, and then this professional development on that day. That's all I'm saying. Is it just that one higher level, we're going to implement Dibbles is great, but maybe there's too much detail in here about it. So that's just my feedback. The committee can deal with that. We can discuss it more at the committee. Mr. Hayner?
One of the problems that in the 8 years I've been on the committee that I've had to wrestle with, and I'll accept I'm not the brightest light in this group, but we take these goals and make an attempt to translate them to evaluate the superintendent. And without specificity, it doesn't work, in my case, for me. But I also understand where you're coming from. This is a district, and to get down to really granular for one particular professional development is not appropriate either. So I don't know whether we have to separate these or what.
Yeah, to be a balance.
well, can I just add something like, so when you're talking about the action step in a SMART goal, it's like how you're going to accomplish that. That is that's the A in the SMART goal acronym. So that is the reason why they're written this way. So you're not saying like you're going to provide professional development, we're actually saying how you're going to do it. And that is, again, part of the SMART goal format, which is something that we've adopted from the state. So I guess that my question to you is there a document that you would like to see that's just for all of you to understand, but these are written this way because of a format that we've been trained to do?
Well, I think that if I were a teacher, I'd probably be very happy with what you wrote.
Correct.
Okay. So I am in no ways being critical of what you've written or how you thought it out or what the SMART goal process is, because we've used it a lot. But the whole thing is that I'm looking at, from my professional drudgery of reading a couple of dozen school improvement plans every year. And I know what I'm looking for in that document. So I'm looking for some sort of a need statement or a reason why we're going in that direction, a desired outcome, and sort of how we're going to get there. And I can see that thinking here, but I'm just not seeing the big picture pattern that somebody who's trained to read school improvement plans is looking at. And as I said before, my style of learning and understanding is unfortunately a little bit on the extreme side towards the intuitive perceptual. But I do think that being able to have that overview and then being able to drill down is a beautiful thing. And if somehow it was nested in a web page so that here are the things, and if by clicking but 3 or 4 steps down, I'm seeing that the third grade team is doing these dibbles exercises and doing this training at the end of the school year. All the third grade teachers will have administered the new dibbles and in this methodology, scored it, and done some sort of a reliability validity test of their work. You know, that's too much detail if you're looking at it from above, but if you're really honed in on the literacy part and you really want to drill down to the part, you're getting there. Because I know it's there. I know this is a very, very thoughtful document, but just from where I have to be as a school committee member, I've got to look at it differently. It's like taking the cube and flipping it around.
So yeah, I would be interested, and then maybe in the subcommittee we can talk about what that overview would look like to provide that context, so you would be able to translate it and really understand the reasons why the particular goals were selected.
No, it's beautiful work, but it's three-dimensional.
I'm very open to that.
Yeah.
Dr. Seuss?
I just want to echo a lot of the comments that have been made by Ms. Morgan and Mr. Schlickman. So I think the question is, who's the audience, right? So we have the audience of administrators and teachers that are really valuable, who need to know all those details. Committee members might also be interested in the details, but they also should be able to look at it and say, what is the district hoping to accomplish in the next year, right? What are they trying to do? And that's what's sort of hidden in the details. You could keep all those details. I don't actually mind having those details, but bring out what is the district doing? What are they trying to accomplish? What's the big push next year? You know, make that front and center.
All right.
Just to chime in, it's what's going to be different next year because you've done all this work.
Exactly, right. Or what,
desired outcome,
desired outcome. What are we hoping to get? Yeah.
All right. I have one additional comment, and that is that we do have the lab report that did identify a variety of things, recommendations to be implemented, and I do feel that it would be appropriate to have a goal around implementing that, or coming up with an implementation plan, or somehow addressing that, and not just sort of letting it sit. So that would be my recommendation to the subcommittee.
I think that you'll find that some of the actual goals here are from the lab report. This is not going to be something that can be done every recommendation, but looked at what would be the most important ones, and that you'll see that in here. Do you want to speak to this, Ms. Simon?
Well, I think you have us on the agenda next week, or next session, June 6th, right, for a presentation. We'll be talking about some of the things we've been doing to address the recommendations in the lab report, as well as when we did the 5-year strategic plan. We also referenced that as a source for some of the initiatives we were seeking to undertake, being the lab program report and the CPR report. I don't know how far those made it out to the public when, it finally got presented, but certainly in the stages of development, when we were looking at the sources of our plan, we were often drawn from both of those sites. But specifically, if you look at the co-teaching goal, one of the recommendations, or several of the recommendations in the lab report, addressed co-teaching as well as what Ms. Savage referred to as best practices. And so we have been engaging in professional development. We are seeking to work with coaching. So most people understand in a professional development, you might go off-site to go to workshops, you might have a few of those. And then as you bring the work back, getting that ongoing coaching is really where it starts to take root. So we've been doing that for a couple of years now, and you heard from the other departments, particularly science and math over the last 2 school committees, how we've worked with them around co-teaching to eliminate curriculum B and whatnot. I know that that came as a math department presentation, but that's work that special ed is doing with the departments. It's always, we think of special ed as a separate entity, but we all work with special ed students, whether you're a general educator or a special educator, everyone's working with special ed students. So I think the goals and recommendations, really ultimately, the point of the report was the district has to own a number of those recommendations, so they shouldn't only sit in special ed goals and objectives. But we can certainly talk about it more as you have further subcommittees.
Great, thank you.
Can I just one thing, just what you just said, because it's confusing for me that when we talked about the budget, because these are all like together, when we talked about the budget, we took there was no section for special education, right? It was all like infused within the stuff. And then now here we are, and we're talking about the goals, and there's like all these goals, but then there's like this little section that's special education, but I think some of the other goals probably are too. So I'm confused that now we're like pulling out some piece of it to like sit here. So I think it would be valuable if you could join us for the subcommittee meeting so we could help us understand why when we did budget it was separate, and now we're back with like some piece of it. So, and then in the 5-year plan we didn't separate it specifically. We didn't separate it out necessarily, but it was within one of the 5 buckets, right? So I think, it's an evolving way of how we think about it, but for me, I was surprised to see it. I wasn't sure what I expected within the goals, but now, so I think it would be good to talk more about it.
I think one thing that you could notice in terms of the of that is that in the goal 1.1, we were talking about curriculum. If you notice, we don't call it special education because it's all woven. But when you look at professional development, there is very specific things that we're doing in that, and we don't want special education and general education to be 2 different parts of the universe of the district. They have to work together and they have to be integrated. And the more and more we have our general education teachers being very confident in their tier 1 work and working with special education teachers, as we've been trying to do more of that by just having 3 teachers at a school versus what we had 3 or 4 years ago, which was 1, which was all pull out. Now we're doing much more of the pushing in and the sharing of the teaching. So it's evolving, and I think hopefully you'll be able to come if we find a time that works. That'd be good.
All right. Let's move on. Next up is the EDCO agreement. Do you want to just briefly explain the changes that we're
Briefly,
approving?
well, you have a summary. Let me go get my computer back booted up here. You have a summary of what the changes are. I think that as we had to do a vote on some of the articles of agreement in the new way that the new way collaboratives have to report to the Department of Education. Any change to the article agreement, first of all, have to go through a process, and then the board, the EDCO board, has to vote on the changes, even if it's small words. And in one case, in this case, taking one of the districts out of the collaborative. And so probably on an annual basis, if there's changes in language, it has to come back to each individual school committee just to approve those language changes. The board has already vetted these and approved them, and now it goes to the school committee, and then once we collect all the school committee votes, it goes back to the Department of Education.
Mr. Schlickman.
So basically, what we're doing is we're removing Winchester.
Yeah, a little bit of extra words, but yes, basically,
Yeah,
yes.
and so that what I had to do is I had to take the agreement as proposed and line it up next to the other document, which looked like state legislation, where they're very opaquely saying on paragraph 72, remove the words A, B, and C. So in the future, it's a minor change, so I'm not going to fuss about it, but I'm saying in the future to have a marked copy with the deletion and the addition would be helpful, because we'd really be seeing how minor the change is.
That's a possibility. In fact, that was the suggestion, and the director gave us a summary of it.
Or taking the paragraphs that are impacted and having that fully written out, so that we see.
You have the
We have the
final
new
agreement,
the
then
final
you have
agreement
the summary.
and the changes that were made. So if we take the paragraphs that were changed and show what the before and after was, either through the cross-out, bold, or whatever, just so, that way it means that I spend 3 minutes looking at it rather than 12.
Right. Okay. All right. Then we'd probably give you a tract and then a non-tract. We could do that next time. So
that would
I'll
be
pass
great.
that suggestion on to the director, because I'm sure we'll be back again this time next year. One of the districts that moved out now wants to come back in. And so every time you do these things, you have to put it back in.
I second that.
Is there any further discussion? Dr. Lazanampi?
I was just wondering why Winchester chose to leave?
Well, I'm not entirely sure, but I understand that they have, the SEAM Collaborative is the other collaborative they belong to, and one of the changes that's been happening over the last few years is doing more professional development, and instituting some of the things that EDCO has been doing for a long time, which are roundtables in different content areas, but mainly special ed. The thing about EDCO, it has roundtables for all of the different disciplines.
I just wanted to add, the school committee roundtable seems to have slowly lost interest. The last two were canceled for lack of participation, and the one prior to that only had myself and 2 other members. And at one point, there were 8 to 10 people. And that's without us both going at the same time. So I don't know whether, the topics have still continued to be good.
Yeah.
And, but it,
Well, if you have any suggestions on how that could be improved, I'll pass them on. I will say that certainly at the content levels, when you have the literacy, or I think the assistant superintendent group is probably one of the most dynamic groups. They wouldn't miss a meeting if they could help it. I mean, so I think the technology group, there's so many groups that meet, and they really rely on the opportunities to get together. In fact, one of the districts that left, they all want to continue in all these roundtables, but you can't if you're not a member.
I think the issue for most of the school committees is, if the school committee roundtables during the workday and you have school committee members who are working during the day, you're not going.
So would you suggest that we have either an evening or an early morning, like a breakfast one? Would that help?
Something that isn't conflicting with work.
Okay. I'll pass that on.
just to share, we discussed that several times to get more people involved. Early morning, if you look at the membership, it's all along 128 on 95. That's gridlock by itself. So you're talking getting up really early to go to breakfast, and a lot of them are younger families and stuff. It's going to have a problem no matter when you do it, but it's worth passing on, I think.
I will.
This has been a real inactive year. I've been doing this now for 5 years, and I was really surprised this year.
We'll see if we can
I look
do a
forward to them,
survey why.
to hear the different things from the different communities, things that we've been successful with, things that we've thought major problems, and I brought back 1 or 2 a couple of years ago that they had a simple solution to it. I think I don't remember exactly what it was, but it's good to hear other voices.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Dr. Seuss?
I just have a particular question about the agreement. So under, there's a change in Article 4 of governance, but I don't know where that change is. It's changing the wording from voting member of to liaison. So governance issues seem pretty important. So I'm like, who's no longer a voting member, now a liaison?
Oh, well.
Not clear.
The only voting, the Articles Agreement, you have to be either a superintendent or a school committee person. The person who is the advisory cannot vote.
Okay, so that's
and that
the
was
change
the
in
change.
wording.
That was
Okay.
the change.
It wasn't
from
clear
when,
who's losing that status. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
The commissioner appointee.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No abstentions, none? Unanimous vote.
Okay.
Thank you. So the monthly financial reports, Michael Mason was not feeling well, and so he's not here. We can discuss them next time. I think just in general, especially we now have 2 weeks, he does prefer, and John had mentioned this, to get questions emailed to him in advance. He can then address them in the meeting if you want them to, but that would just be helpful if you do. I understand when we get the report 2 days in advance, you don't get to it, but to the extent you can, help them out. Chapter 70 funding, Mr. Hayner, you had wanted this on the agenda, so I'll give you the floor first, and then I have some remarks about it. So.
Thank you. Several people have asked me about Chapter 70 funding. I gave them a non-political response initially, and then the question was asked, since we're getting $2 million back, how much of that is coming to the school? And at that point, I shared with them that I would prefer not to respond to them because it would become my personal political view at the time, and I didn't think that was fair to try to dissuade people. So that was the question, the major question from several of these people, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
So this was late being put in Nova, so I did print copies, not quite enough, but you have it on your screen. So this just looks at the history of our school funding from the town and the Chapter 70 funding, which comes through the town, and then the net town funding, which is the town funding minus the Chapter 70. So that's the funding that's actually coming from town taxpayers from the property tax. So we did have this discussion at long range planning, and it was shared at budget at least, but probably not to the full committee. The main point was that in Arlington, we do not tie our school budget to the Chapter 70 funding. So if you look at this history going back to 2013. That year in 2013, which may still have been the result of the kindergarten switch, I think maybe not, but we had a large increase in Chapter 70 funding, but that did not necessarily, certainly when you look at our dollar increase has always been higher than the Chapter 70 increase, so that's one way of looking at it. But as far as whether the percentage increase matches, sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. So then if you look at other years, in FY 2015, we only got $185,000 from the state, but we still got $3 million increase. So the town kicked in a 7% increase, whereas the state only kicked in a 2% increase. So the point raised by Altasti and others was that we don't tie it, we have not in the past tied it to Chapter 70. It doesn't make sense to do it just this year because it's a jackpot. If you do, then what's going to happen when that jackpot runs out? I think we all feel hopeful that over the next few years we'll continue to see large increases, but after that we'll be back to the 2% increases a year again, because eventually the foundation budget implementation will be done, and we will be back to inflation-only increases. So that's sort of the picture. If you look at FY 2020, we're getting the schools are getting a $5.3 million increase if the override passes. So we're getting $2 million from the state and $3 million from the town. Look at it that way if you want to, or you can just mix it all together, which is how the Finance Committee looks at it. So that's where things came out. Certainly, individual members are free to have their own views, but we did approve the override commitments, which ties us to that spending amount, regardless of whether Chapter 70 goes up more, goes down, stays the same. So, Mr. Schlickman?
Yeah, it is a fiscal stability and responsibility thing. The driving factor, though, over the past 6 years is the increase in our enrollment, because that drives the foundation budget. Budget drives our minimum, and because our minimum can't increase more than a certain percent, the difference between that and what the net school spending obligation would be has to be filled in through Chapter 70. So having growth in enrollment is going to increase your Chapter 70. So for the next 6 years or so, as the bulge progresses up from grade 7 through grade 12, assuming that the kindergarten doesn't drop off, we're going to have this kind of an impact on the foundation budget, net school spending, and thus a higher Chapter 70 than would be expected if we were had a similar enrollment without a lot of growth behind it, which is why the Finance Committee and us made an arrangement to incorporate a growth number in terms of the town allocation rather than having it driven through the Chapter 70. But both are doing exactly the same thing. So if the Chapter 70 is going up because we're growing, and there's a growth contingency in the fiscal stability plan, it's really a wash, hopefully.
Mr. Hayner?
Just two things that I want to clarify. So because of this formula that the school committee's worked out with finance and the rest of the town, money is coming in that direction and not from Chapter 70 this year. That's my first thing. And if I stated it wrong, please correct me. I forgot the second one. So I just wanted to clarify that. So.
Yeah. So that's, I mean, if there wasn't a large Chapter 70 increase, hypothetically, what would have happened? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I can just say, before we got that increase, before we heard that we were getting that increase, there was very stiff resistance among the Board of Selectmen, even adjusting the enrollment growth formula. So what we got was an adjustment in the enrollment growth formula from 35% to 50%, and we got this extra money contingent on the override of $600,000 this year, $600 next year, then $800, then $800. So all of that was made a lot easier by the Chapter 70 situation. Whether it would have happened, some of it would have happened without, I don't know, that's hypothetical. But certainly having the Chapter 70 money helped us with our argument that we needed more money.
Just to clarify, if I may, those 3 years, those numbers that you just gave are committed no matter what Chapter 70 happens next year and the following year. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay.
Well, just the bottom line here is we agreed to take the revenues that are coming in from Chapter 70 and put it into the pot. We take what we agreed to, and if there's additional money that the town doesn't have to spend, that goes into the stability fund. And when we get to the point where what we need is more than we're taking in from town taxes and Chapter 70, then we start drawing out of the stability fund. So that's the way we've done it, and by not taking too much out, we extend the override.
Sorry,
when
go
you
ahead,
talk about,
Mr. Hayner.
if I may, the stability fund, you're talking about the town, not ours.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure that's
There's an
clear.
there's an
That we
override
don't,
stability
we can't go
fund.
to the bank on our own.
No.
Thank you.
Dr. Seuss?
So a point I made at long-range planning is, the 2 million is, it's very nice for everybody. But I do want to sort of say that if the state were to seriously commit huge amounts of money to education, just decide this is where we're putting our priority, I would want the flexibility to go back, and ask for, because then the feeling would be, well, the state's putting this huge infusion, but we're not adjusting our expectations.
We have to be very clear on this. Chapter 70, when it was written, although it says school funding to try to bring balance throughout the state, it put one specific thing in there, I think, to get it passed. It's discretionary on the town's part, on the municipality's part. I'm not plus or minus. So that part would definitely have to be changed.
Yep.
Dr. Alston-Ampe?
And I'd just point out that, okay, I'm as big a school booster as any of us, but I can't see a situation where the state suddenly funds education very heavily without decreasing funding in other areas.
Well,
and
the
so,
new tax sources.
They just did.
Yeah.
If
there's new tax sources.
Yeah.
Millionaire tax or something.
Yes. Big if.
Yeah.
Anyway, my point is the money in the state is a zero-sum game. And if they're pushing, yes, they have the ability to increase it potentially if it ever happens. But until then, if they were to increase Chapter 70 greatly, I would be concerned that there's going to be a subsequent decrease in the other funding that Arlington gets. And so, yes, sure, we're getting more for Chapter 70, but if the town as a whole is getting about the same, I'm not sure I would feel comfortable going and saying, oh, we should be, because we're getting that much more Chapter 70, we should be getting more for the schools. I mean, it's going to depend on what the situation is at that time.
Okay, so next item is appointment to the Calendar Study Committee. So Dr. Bodie has formed, or is in the process of forming,
We did.
a committee to look at the calendar, and there should be a school committee member on that. So is there anybody who's interested on serving? I know Dr. Seuss is. Is there anybody else? All right.
I
do we have a
nominate Dr.
motion?
Seuss.
I second that nomination.
All those in favor? Aye.
I love
It'll be
it.
fun.
Volunteer.
Have fun. Good luck.
If you had a volunteer. All right.
Yep.
Unanimous also.
Oh, yeah, this is.
All right, on to the
Awful.
superintendent's report.
Okay, have a number of things, and I'll address the ones that are specifically on here as well. But before I do that, I do want to thank the Human Rights Commission for sponsoring the Solidarity event the other night to show the support of the community against acts of hate. It was really quite well attended. It was really quite a comment on Arlington. It was a wonderful event to be at. And we also in our district, and I commend the Bishop Dig Committee. They brought in a facilitator and had a workshop a couple of nights ago, which was facilitated by a bishop parent, Stacy Davison. And the title of the workshop was Respond and Prevent, a dialogue about addressing hate incidents. So we had something in Thompson a few weeks ago, a month ago, lose time. But I think that just the coordination and the support of all the groups in town has just been quite remarkable. So moving on from that, the update on the Arlington High School building project. Well, as we've been sitting here this evening, there was tours going on for anybody who would like to come in and have questions answered, see the building. There's going to be one more tour that's going to be on Sunday, June 2nd, from 1 to 3. The tours actually have a tighter time than that. The tours, like tonight, was in the range of 7 to 7:20. The same thing will be true on June 2nd from 1 to 1:20, and then there'll be a chance for people to ask questions. But I think one of the best resources, if people want to educate themselves more about the project, is the website. It's just an amazing website. I honestly have to say it's probably the best building website there is in the Commonwealth. There's so much information there about conditions, past reports. It's a very transparent about all the processes and the decisions that were made to the point we are today. So that website is ahsbuilding.org. So we had a forum the other night, which was not particularly well attended, but there were a lot of really good questions, and people had the same presentation. It was very well done. So then we're trying to have people have as many opportunities as to get educated about this, and the vote is on June 11th. I don't know if Mr. Stillman wants to talk more about this.
No, but I think you've covered everything. The vote is June 11th, so it all comes down to that.
Yeah, but I think people need to inform themselves.
Yes,
you know.
yeah. So I would encourage everybody to do what Dr. Bodie said, go to the website, get information. There's replays of, I think, last night's the presentation of the night on ACMi. And if any of the public have questions about the building, you send an email to the building committee, and we'll get back to you as quickly as we possibly can.
I'm glad you mentioned that. ACMi has been terrific. They've come in and done a lot of footage in the school, many interviews, and they're working on a number of segments. And I think the first segment has been completed. I don't know if it's been posted yet, but.
Yeah, I saw it.
You saw it? Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
And watch the video, the fly-through video.
Oh, and the fly-through video, yes. In the newsletter sent out this week, right in the letter is another link to it. So you can get the link through my newsletter, but you can also get the link on the website as well. As I mentioned a couple of years ago, we decided as a Middlesex League to create, to team up together to have a youth risk survey that would be something that would have questions that would be similar, so that we can take a look at the responses in the league, because there's a lot more similarities than there are differences between our communities. And just to see if we're seeing, one community is really having a great success in terms of vaping, for example, what are the things that they're doing? Is it intervention to change those outcomes? So that's the intent of it. We have always done this survey from grades 6 through 12. Apparently this year there was some controversy, as I know some of you are aware, at Gibbs, that the survey was given without the opportunity for an opt-out, and that was an error. I think in the split to Gibbs, that the people who were organizing the survey didn't realize that they needed to send all of the templates and letters and so forth to both schools, not to just to Addison. And so that's something that will be corrected next year. So Ms. DeFrancisco has sent out an apology about that, and certainly we'll rectify it next year. I did, following that, contact all of the other superintendents to find out what they do. No one sends the survey out, but some of the schools allow people to come into the school office and look at the survey, and we'll do that next year.
It's available online, right?
Well, after the survey is given, all the questions are available online, yes. So they change a little bit.
Same day?
No.
After the results.
No, the results. We're going to probably one of the reasons we changed was, one, we wanted to be able to have more of an opportunity to do best practices in terms of what you can do for interventions, and also to get the results back sooner. The old way that we did it took months to get results. We'll probably get our first preliminary report sometime this summer, so that we go into the school year, not get the report in November, December, having the school year start. So we'll certainly get more information when we get those results. So kindergarten and enrollment numbers. Kindergarten numbers have grown a little bit since the last time, but not substantially. We are at the 509. We were another week ago. Last week we were at 504. So there's been a bit of a slowdown, but we haven't hit the summer yet. You were given a copy of what the enrollments are at each of the elementary schools. I'm looking at and already have initiated some invitations to people in different buffer zones if they would like to move to a different school with maybe a projected smaller enrollment per class. We have some interest, but that will tweak it a little bit. But as we look at these numbers, one of the things that we are doing is Plan B, and then sometimes those Plan B involves a lot more thinking about where we would have an art class or a music class should we need another classroom. So I think that as we move into next year, and we'll see how this summer, the effect of this summer on enrollment at a kindergarten, I think we're going to need to have some more discussions about space in some of our schools. That's clearly on the horizon. And I realize that saying that after we've just finished a project at Thompson, a project at Hardy, renovating Gibbs, and now the high school, is not probably something people want to hear, but we're doing our very best to try to use buffer zones to help move students, but also to try to be pretty creative about space.
Mr. Hayner?
I would ask you to communicate with individual schools where, if just an example, Stratton, the first grade class has 4 classes in it right now, and kindergarten has 4, and it looks like they may have 4 again. The numbers are down a little bit, but the first grade has 3 with 21, 24, and 26. Going up and moving up, are you looking to add? You said trying to get people to move around. The only place that, looking at the numbers and stuff, that I thought you might be able to add, delete is bracket. I mean, you're more wide, you see the bigger picture than we do. Please let the parents know as soon as you can if you're making a decision to add a classroom or something like that, so that they're not constantly asking us, which we then have to refer to you because we don't see the big picture and stuff.
Well, the announcement at bracket has already gone out that we're going to have 5 first grades next year.
Okay.
That went out a couple weeks ago.
How about Stratton going into first?
They're going to have 4.
Okay.
That I believe has already gone out to. They're having 4 first
Great.
grades. I'm not. It's really looking like Stratton's going to have 4 kindergartens, though. I'm still looking at the buffer zones because Stratton has a buffer zone with Pierce and a buffer zone with Bishop.
If I may, just one more. We've talked about, in my understanding, there was an RFP put out and it wasn't responded to redo the census to get a better number of where we are and stuff like that. I think we need to consider doing that. I realize you had problems the last time you did it, getting a reputable person, but or a group. We need to do that so we can accurately do this.
Yeah, we did put an RFP out, and we had one person,
Right,
and Mr. Mason has been looking. He's been looking for references.
Okay.
And I think that given all the transition, that was something that's sort of fallen down on the priority list. But I totally agree that we need to take another look at this.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
I want to look at the map. And I want to look at, I think that we just put 6 classrooms on at the Hardy, and they have 1 buffer zone with Thompson. And I think that we need to give you more flexibility. I don't think this is, I don't think that what the map provides you gives you enough choices. And so I think we need to look at the map, and I think we need to expand buffer zones, and I think Hardy needs to buffer with at least 2 schools. Every other school does. So I understand that we didn't want to take that on this year, and we're going to the voters on June 11th, and I think we need to do all of those things. But I don't know what kind of magic we can expect you and your office to do with this when you're provided with a map that limits your choices to the extent that it does. So that's what I think. I think we need to take that on in a very big way and expand those buffer zones. And I think we need to use the data that Mr. Schlichtman has provided about enrollment growth. And I think, we have to go to the community and say, this is what we need to do. And I think it's going to be a tough conversation. And I think people are, are going to be disappointed and frustrated. But I don't want to look at school capacity. I think we need to look at school capacity and facilities, but we're working with a really limited map. And I understand that there was some analysis done looking at where kids cluster by schools, but I don't believe that expanding buffer zones, especially to allow more children to attend the Hardy, is going to be to the detriment of the town. And I can't imagine that it could possibly make your job any harder. So I just don't think it gets any, I think we can only improve things if we expand buffers and look at what we can do. So that's what I think should be considered starting
So
next
that's
year.
not something on the agenda tonight, so we shouldn't be discussing it, but we can definitely refer it to a subcommittee.
Sounds like I move that goes to community relations.
Did you have a brief comment, Dr. Allison-Ampe, or?
Yeah, I'm looking at the map itself, the physical map, and I think part of the problem with talking about Hardy is just that Spy Pond makes a really big natural barrier for moving kids around
I understand there's a pond there.
Yeah.
I've lived here for a while. I know
Yeah,
there's a pond
but
there.
it's,
The island can be used again.
Well, we should talk about this.
Yeah, I think
Okay, let's talk about this.
Yep.
We need.
Okay.
We pondered that the last time we did buffer zones.
All right, next.
So, so next. Well, some great news in athletics. We have 2 teams that have already qualified for playoffs. Our softball team and our boys tennis. And we have 3 that are very close. Maybe I shouldn't jinx them and say which they are, but they know. We are now coming into sort of the culmination of really a lot of our children's 12-year history here. Their graduation is coming a week from this Saturday. Some people are going to be very sad. And having a graduate, but I would invite you all, and I know you have already received an invitation. It's at 3:00 on June 1st. And it's really just a very special time for our students. And so it's great to have people there to cheer them on. And anybody in the community is most welcome as also. Another thing I would like to invite you to is tomorrow we have Addison Middle School every Memorial Day, Friday before Memorial Day, has this wonderful ceremony where they honor our veterans. And Mr. Hayner comes to that, and it's again tomorrow. It's at 1:00 in the Wood Gym, and you're all invited to attend.
If I might say, it is a very inspiring program. It means a lot to the veterans. There's a couple of, well, last year there were 2 World War II vets, and it really meant a lot to them. And the
Good.
students and teachers put on a great show every year.
It's great. The music, the having each one of the veterans be escorted up by a student, that's quite an honor. It's really well done. And the last thing is that yesterday was the opening reception for the art exhibit at that town hall, and it is terrific. So if you have a chance to be at town hall or just walking by, please go upstairs, and the upstairs, the second floor, and you can see all of the art. You know, the art teachers selected the best examples of some of the genres they worked in this year, and they are in exhibits by schools. So it will go until, I think.
No, it actually ended yesterday.
Oh,
No.
is this the one that was
No, I
at?
think it's still there for a while. I think it's still there for a while. Okay. And that's it.
Great. All right, the consent agenda. All items listed with an asterisk are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the committee so requests, in which event the item will be considered in its normal sequence. Notice they now have asterisks. Approval of warrant number 19223, dated May 9th, 2019, in the amount of $530,889.15. Approval of minutes, regular school committee minutes, date May 9th, 2019, and no trip. And no.
So move.
Second.
I ask the warrant be withheld.
Okay. So approval of the minutes, all those in favor?
Yes.
Yes. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, unanimous on the minutes. Oh, who made the motion?
I second it.
Does one of you have the warrant?
I
You have
haven't
it?
seen it.
No, the new warrant to be signed?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen one.
No, we don't
No,
have
Karen
one.
usually has it.
It may not have made it out of the,
I'm going to go down and see if it's, we need to have it signed tonight.
Okay.
Nobody goes home.
Okay. So
no
you're not going to vote on the
questions, I'm
warrant?
just
All right.
conflicted.
Okay. Motion on the warrant?
So moved?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay, so unanimous with Mr. Schlickman abstaining. All right, we can start committee reports while Dr. Bodie is gone. Budget?
budget. I'm going to be getting in touch with you folks to set up a meeting in the next couple weeks.
Great. Community relations.
Yeah, we had a meeting last week, maybe. Continue to talk about the after-school issue. We have another meeting on June 3rd, where we are inviting representatives from the programs that are housed in our schools to come to the meeting and talk about their challenges, what they see as possibilities for expansion, and so forth. We still do not have a suggestion to you about the Human Rights Committee appointees. That will continually been something I've been not as good about. 6:30. Yeah.
Curriculum instruction and assessment accountability.
We need to have a meeting, and we are going to schedule one.
Great. Facilities.
Nothing at this time.
Policies and procedures.
No report.
Legal services.
No report.
We already talked about the building committee. Liaison reports. Nothing. Announcements. Mr. Schlickman? Sorry, Mr. Hayner?
Thank you. I'd like to share with the community that the Arlington Rotary, the Rotary Club of Arlington will be having its annual Paul Harris Award Dinner on June 4th at the Woburn Country Club. We will be recognizing Clarissa Rowe as a Paul Harris Fellow and Al Tosti as Community Person of the Year. If you're interested in getting tickets, go to the Rotary Club of Arlington webpage and you can do so. Thank you.
Any other announcements? Okay, future agenda items. All right, so I have just a couple of related items. So going to try to reestablish the committee potluck, end of year potluck. So I'll send out a doodle to everybody at the table. I guess it would have to be that last week of school, the stub week. So I don't know if people are taking off immediately or what, but I'll send out a few dates during that week. I talked with Dr. Bodie briefly about the possibility of having a retreat. It's been a long time since we've had one. There's issues with the goals. There's some issues with other things. So that might be useful to do. So again, I don't know if people want to do that over the summer or wait till the fall. I didn't particularly like the weekend ones. I would argue for one over the summer when we can hopefully do it during the week, but I'm totally flexible and open to suggestions. Any ideas?
I'm not going to have an idea on timing, but the retreat, I can't begin to describe how valuable it was for the people who went through the full retreat process 6-7 years ago. And we've had turnover in the membership, and the retreat gave us a common ground, a common language, and an understanding of each other that you don't get in this formal setting. It was very, very worth doing, so I'm happy to go and push forward and do another retreat.
Okay, well, we will work on that. And then again, I will try to send out a doodle for a possible summer meeting. I think we should have one scheduled. Last year we had a huge increase in kindergarten. We didn't really find out about it until September. So I think it's good to have one on the schedule for August. I know everybody's traveling, but to the extent we can get a quorum or 5 or 6 members, that would be great. So again, I will send out a doodle on that. Anything else? All right. So next is executive session. To conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiating with union and or non-union personnel or contract negotiations with union and or non-union personnel in which, if held in an open meeting, may have a detrimental effect. To conduct strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation in which, if held in an open meeting, may have a detrimental effect. Collective bargaining may also be conducted, including a vote to approve AEA Unit C Memorandum of Agreement, April 2019, vote to approve AEA Unit A Memorandum of Agreement, April 2019. We will return to open session to presumably vote approval of those. I have a motion to enter executive session.
So move.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
5 yeses, 2 ayes.
And we are back to regular session. We have 2 agreements to approve. Can I get a motion?
Move to accept the Unice contract as proposed.
Memorandum of agreement. Okay. Second.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Another motion to approve Unit A memorandum of agreement.
Second.
So moved?
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. And you have unanimous as well. Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Aye. Yes.
Great.
Also unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Folks.